Dun dun dun, we are live. And to answer Wilson's question, I am still, though I didn't on these drives because my sister was with me, I am still listening to the Great Gatsby audiobook on my drives. I'm on my seventh time through them. Uh,
Wow.
I don't drive that much. It's taken me, and it's only like, nice asshole joke here. And it's only like I think it's a short book, so the audio book is about 4+ hours long, so it really doesn't take that long to get through it.
Right.
Not one of these 18-hour audio books.
Hmm.
So
So you never tried listening to a Peter F. Hamilton book?
you got to figure it takes me 20 just to go to the comic shop or to the train station, which I was doing earlier in the year when I was commuting in to teach. Take me 20-25 minutes one way each drive. So I got to figure once a week I'm driving to the comic shop and listening to the audio book for 45 minutes. And the other time it's like I'm going to the grocery store, which takes 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm only listening to that short bit. So it's like I'm listening. It takes a good few weeks to get through 4+ hours of the audiobook. So but by the time I get back to the beginning, and one thing I noticed too in doing it this way is the Gatsby novel is also kind of a loop in that it starts with there's a narrator in the Gatsby novel, Nick. It starts with Nick kind of being nostalgic because he's telling you about the summer where he met the Great Gatsby. So he's telling you a story about the past. And he's kind of, in the beginning of the book, is kind of nostalgic and looking back. And then it goes into sort of the narration, which is present tense. So it starts kind of with him looking backwards. And then he's telling you the story kind of as it happens. There's not that real looking backwards nostalgia. But then at the end of the book is kind of nostalgic too. Because he's to give away a major spoiler in 100-year-old book. The Great Gatsby dies at the end of it. So then he's nostalgic. So we start out with him kind of looking backward, telling you the story about when he knew and met the Great Gatsby. And we end up kind of with him. And then the whole story is really told kind of, even though it actually is back in time, it's told in the present tense. Then we end the story with him looking backwards and being nostalgic about his time. So I noticed, because there's a couple of times where the audio book ended in the middle of my drive. So I'm just like, well, I'm just going to start it over again. And that's why I noticed, wow, it's kind of a loop. The sort of tone and tenor of the end and the beginning are the same, and it's different than the middle. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I never noticed that before. Never having listened to the audiobook 7 times in a row. But different things jump out at me every time.
That's interesting because I read it in school.
Right.
And then I remember right after we read it, we watched a movie that they made way back when.
The 70s one, probably.
Yes. And to me, it just felt like it was two different things because,
oh yeah,
again, it's also the fact that it's two different mediums.
Right.
And you picture it one way in your head and then to actually watch it. And I never went back to it. And I didn't watch the newer movie that came out. But it's one of those things where it's like, now that you've been talking about it, it's like, oh, maybe that's something 4 hours. So that's something I could do in the morning while I'm working and stuff like that. That's interesting. Because I've been, what I've been reading lately is the Conan books. And
I started reading the Robert E. Howard ones for the first time pre-COVID when I was riding the train. I haven't made it through them all yet, but I made it through about half of them. They're pretty good.
I've started it what's interesting about this particular one that I'm reading is it talks about the I guess the foundation of what he was writing beforehand, before he got to Conan.
Yeah.
And one of the stories is an early draft of Kull, King of Atlantis. Is he King of Atlantis or Kull of Atlantis?
Yeah.
It's an early draft of that, and then it's an early draft of his Puritan character, Solomon Kane.
Okay.
And it's like I only know those characters from the comics.
Me too.
So there's a picture in my head of
Right.
them, but as they're describing it, it's like, wow, that's not what I ever really pictured. But I could see the starting of the Hyberian Age and how he was putting that together. And it was interesting to read the creation of this world before we actually dove into the world. So I found that to be fascinating in itself,
Okay.
because I do like the finding out about the the creation of this world, and how a story creator starts off what he pulled from wherever he written before, and then what he's putting into it now. And there was an article that the author of this book talks about, where he said because of the way he started these stories, it came easier to him because he already knew the history.
Okay.
And so what he was writing was not necessarily a story, but he was chronicle to him a true event.
Okay.
And I found that was an interesting take on the whole thing.
Yeah, the one I have is just the Conan stuff. So that's what
I
Saturday.
have books with the Solomon Kane and the Brand McMorn stories. Solomon Kane gets very repetitive because usually more than half of the stories are actually set in Africa, even though he's a Puritan. And he bumps into a village where everybody was killed by some monster. Then he hunts down the monster and kills it.
Huh. By the way, did you guys see my Tit Goblins here? Jared, I enjoyed your desk layout video. It's very similar to mine, only much more organized. I'm jealous of your giant window yard scenery. Yesterday, I made a video showing off everything that's on my drawing table.
Oh, I completely missed that one. I'm going to have to go back and watch it after the show.
This drawing table, which I got, I looked it up on my calendar. When did I say it? December 9th, 1993. And I've been adding side trays and stuff to it over the years to fit all my stuff. It's a brain trust without the fuss. Happy Friday, gentlemen, and happy Friday to you. I was 7 in my first real comic that was mine, and not one of my brothers or from the pile, was Conan #7, Barry Windsor Smith. He's one of my top 3. Yeah, I was I was the John Buscema Conan era. So I didn't get to see the one Barry Windsor Smith Conan I had was Red Nail. So that was a good one to have. Evening, gang. TGIF. Comic crack into house. And you have a house plant. I killed mine. Stupid house plant. Yeah, it's tough. Tough to keep those plants alive. I must say. Mind the comics. Good evening. Good evening. Yeah, like I said, the Conan, I haven't read any of the precursor. I got, like, most of my text reading, I like reading digitally. So I got a collected edition of all the Conan stuff. Like, I don't think I've dipped into it in a couple of years now, but I got about halfway through riding the train. I'll be riding the train a lot more this upcoming fall, so I'll probably be reading some more of it.
Mm-hmm.
Some more Conan.
Yeah, for me, the Conan books were Buscema, and by the time I was buying them, it was kind of near the end of like the King Conan run.
Okay.
I remember buying a box of them somewhere where they were like a quarter a piece or something. I remember like they had on the cover was his son was dead and stuff like that. So it was like it was really jumping around from different time periods and stuff like that, because I never had a full run. It was just always, you would find Conan books everywhere, and every time I saw them, it's like, oh, that's a great cover. I know I don't have that one, and I would just pick them up, because the great thing about the comics where you kind of could drop in at any point.
Yeah.
King Conan. It is an adventure that's
Mike
going
Kaluta
on.
covers, a lot of good Mike Kaluta covers in those.
Yes.
So
That's the whole jumping in at any point. It's kind of the reason when Del Rey did those Robert E. Howard compilations, they published the stories in publishing order instead of chronological order, because some people insist that you got to read Conan in chronological order. You don't really.
no.
No, not at all, because it was never written to be that way.
Right. It's what they said in the preambles for those books. Imagine an old warrior telling you war stories. He's not going to do a biography of his military career. He's just telling you war stories.
That reminds me of Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, which I was never a fan of as a kid. I always preferred the realism of Sergeant Rock, even though I wasn't a DC Comics kid. I still liked Sergeant Rock. It wasn't until the 90s when I read an interview with Dick Ayers, and he said, Sergeant Fury is that's a bunch of veterans sitting around telling each other war stories. That's what it is, and you don't want them to get too serious because you're a veteran, and that made me understand Sergeant Fury a lot better. I was like, okay, I get it now.
Because one month they're in the Pacific Theater, then the next month they're in Germany.
Yeah, they're just telling war stories. That's all it is.
Exactly.
That's what it is. Jared, you swayed me, and I just blew through Once and Future Volume 3, Epic Series. Yeah, that's I'm enjoying that one. I like it. That was the one I got, I think, issue 28 of a couple weeks ago, and said that, wow, 28 issues. It's got so many issues, I can take it for granted now. It's kind of like, how that happens when you're buying a comic for a while, even if it's good, even if you like it, even if the same people doing it, you start taking it for granted. You're like, it kind of becomes old hat. Then I found out issue 30 is the last one. I'm like, I'm only going to be able to take it for granted for 2 more issues. So I was like, Oh, and speaking of Barry Windsor Smith, I noticed in the I haven't seen these anywhere else. In the back of Comic Shop News, they have some of the Eisner Award winners. And Barry Smith won for, I think, Best Graphic Novel. Where is it? Best Graphic Album, Monsters by Barry Windsor Smith. I think he also won for Best Lettering. Barry Windsor Smith Monsters. I'm like, okay. I'm sure a lot of letterers were like,
lettering. Well, yeah.
A lot of letterers are like, you know what? We do this. Nobody notices us ever, except when things go wrong. And now Barry Windsor Smith wins the best letterer. He's won so many awards for his art. He doesn't need best letterer. I think Dave Sharp says that every now and then. Dave Sharp has been lettering in comics since 1992. I don't think he's like never nominated or wins any awards. So
yeah, that's a shame.
Passed by again.
He's someone who basically was one of the people that taught me how to letter, and I've won an award for lettering, and he was really proud of it. But at the same time, he was like, "I was proud of you, but
poor letterers." Barry Windsor Smith blows them out. But there's stuff I hadn't even like. Stan Sakai won for. I didn't even realize this was out. I'd only seen certain best publication for early readers up to age 8 is Chibi Usagi Attack of the Heebie-Chibis by Julie and Stan Sakai.
Oh, okay.
Now I've seen some of the like Chibi Usagi stuff they've done, like in the back of Usagi Yojimbo every now and then, but I didn't realize they did their own graphic novel. I think Julie is his daughter.
I guess I do not know.
I think she was, if I remember right from the Usagi. And she's doing the chibi drawing, which is those super deformed characters, as we used to call them in the 90s. Mm-hmm. They're his lettering or speech balloon placement was pretty cool. Yeah. I'm not saying that Barry Windsor Smith's lettering wasn't terrific in Monsters. I'm just saying the letter he didn't really need that award.
Is
You
that
could
his
have given
first
it to
time
some guy
lettering?
who's been lettering for 30 years and nobody notices.
Hmm.
You know? Let's see. Best short story. Funeral in Foam by Casey Gilly and uh, Raina Telgemeier in You Died, an anthology of the afterlife.
It kind of reminds me of like Oscars and stuff like that, because some of these titles I've never heard of.
Well, that one is from
And
Raina Telgemeier. Her name's going to win awards because she does a lot of. I don't know her work at all because she does young adult stuff. But a lot of the awards are who they want to give the award, who they want to represent comics and themselves. That's what these awards come down to. So they pick who they want to represent them with. So you're not going to pick anything too controversial or weirdo or out there. That's just every awards ever. Let's see. Like best single issue one shot must be able to stand alone in parentheses. So I guess that's important. Wonder Woman Historia, The Amazons by Kelly Sue DeComic and Phil Jimenez. I never read that one. There's a lot of Wonder Woman stuff out. So.
yeah,
Best continuing series, Bitter Root, which I was reading. That's a good series. It's not continuing anymore, and something is killing the children.
those at least I heard of. I haven't read them, but I heard of
Yeah.
them.
What do you guys think is the most lettered comic? It's basically a book. Cerebus? Yeah, Cerebus won quite. I think Cerebus and Dave Sim won more awards for lettering than he did for Cerebus for cartooning. And he really did. His lettering is very. He really did draw his lettering. I mean, he didn't just he didn't just use uppercase lettering. His lettering was part of the art. He drew in sound effects like you could when the artist himself is doing that. He was expressing a lot of the art through the lettering, besides just block lettering that you're supposed to read. He really did go all out. If you've never seen Cerebus and seen especially the later stuff with Gerhard doing the backgrounds, that lettering was really something.
Yeah, but
So I can
the comic with the most lettering in it, it's a Belgian comic. It's the Ure by Edgar Pierre Jacobs. That thing has got some talking sequences that make Chris Claremont look like a Frank Miller action sequence.
Roy Thomas, and I'll not here's one I'll nominate for most lettering in it. That's not well known. Edge of Chaos by Gray Moro. A Pacific comic from the early 80s, only 3 issues of it. I remember buying it back then. And I don't know, in the last 10 years, I only got the first issue because it was so lettering heavy that I just was like, and there's even nudity in it, and you don't notice the nudity because you're so busy reading all the type. And I actually bought the other 2 issues, I don't know, somewhere in the last decade, and read it and liked it a lot better than when I read it when I was, I don't know, 17. But that had a lot of lettering in it. Oh, another
Yeah,
one with a lot of lettering, the Hembeck stuff from the early 80s.
yeah, that had a good amount of lettering. I don't know if I ever really sat and thought about what what book had heavy lettering in it. Um, I do confess that the last book that I picked up when I was becoming a Marvel zombie was the X-Men because it was
Mhm.
so heavy with lettering in it. It was the last one for me to pick up because I grabbed everything else first. Um, and I do like reading older comics and seeing what was done with the lettering. Uh, mentioned Roy Thomas. there's a bunch of books that he's done, and it's fascinating just to see the placements of the balloons and how well the balance between art and lettering is. Where now with me doing computer lettering, there's a limitation to where you're placing stuff. There's a preference to what editors want and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where you could get away with something back then because you're not only hand lettering it, but you're also hand lettering the balloon itself. So you're
Right.
following the artwork.
Right.
Where you could do it with the computer, but it just takes so much longer,
And
and
they
it
don't want you
looks like
to.
it's computered.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I made my video about the artist edition of the Jack Kirby and Stan Lee Fantastic Four. One of the things I really enjoyed looking at was, I think Sam Rosen lettered a lot of. I really enjoyed the lettering on the page. It was just so wonderfully done, and like you said, and there was a lot of him putting the balloons and following the contour of the figure or the action in it. He really masterfully put in there. So it was kind of, just stuff I hadn't really. You don't really see that anymore when it comes to lettering.
No, unfortunately, I think it's also because lettering is at the end of the book, and
Right.
everything else, time is eating up. The writer is eating up time, the penciler is eating up time. So
That
by the
used to
time
be
it goes to
done after the pencils, before the inks. So
right, and now it's basically from Marvel, the letterer and colorist get the pages at the same time. Because
right.
I don't know if they still do it, but that's how we set them up.
Yeah.
So then everything can be merged together at the end. But again, it never seems to be enough time.
Right. And here's something I didn't know existed. Best Archival Collection Project. Strips, at least 20 years old. Popeye, the E.C. Seeger Sundays, Volume 1, Fantagraphics. So I was like, oh, I didn't know they put out a collection of Popeye Sundays. That's probably interesting to look at. I don't think
Yeah, it
I've ever
probably would
seen
be.
that.
I know I've seen a few Popeye projects over the years because that was one of the favorite characters to my stepdad, and I recall buying him an oversized book that
Right.
reprinted the comic strips. Now, I don't know if it was just focusing on the Sundays or if it was the weeklies.
I think it was I got volume 1 of I think Fantagraphs, but it must be 15 years ago now. Like Eric Larson said, I got volume 1 and then none of the other volumes
Hmm.
of the Popeye strip. That's the only Popeye stuff I have.
That might be it. That might be what I had
Yeah,
gotten
that
him.
might be what you have. But I thought that was cool. Let's see, the best U.S. edition of International Materia Asia is Love Sickness Junto Ito Story Collection. I don't think I've heard that. He's the guy who does spirals, I think, that I have. It was Uzumaki. So I've read some of his stuff, but I didn't know there was a new one out that won an award. I'll have to look for that one. That reminds me of collected edition. I've been meaning to buy the Peter Bag Hate box set for about a year and a half now. But it's anywhere from $80 to $100. And every time I'm about to buy it, a hard drive breaks. I bought a computer. I bought on this very day. I think my computer's 1 year old. Its birthday is today. I bought a new computer last year. Just when I go to buy it, something happens where that $100 gets used up somewhere else.
Hmm.
And just this week, or just this week, I think it was 2 days ago, one came up on eBay, box set, and I think the bid was $60 with like $10 shipping, which is just, and I just went, well, there's no way I'm letting that guy get it for $60. I may put a bid in for 70, just because that 70 plus the shipping brings up to about 85, which is about the low end of the price for. So I'm like, I'm putting in a bid of 70. Put in a bid of 70. The bid was at 69 and change. I'm like, I'm gonna get sniped. Who cares? And sure enough, I got sniped that night. But I'm like, as long as no one else was getting a bargain on it, I'm happy. No, I just did. Sometimes I bid on things on eBay when the price is low, and I just know I'm not going to get them. It's just kind of like, oh, this price is too low. I'll put a bid on, and I'll be outbid in day, and that almost always happens.
Almost always, but once in a while.
Once in a while.
Once
That's
in a
how I
while.
ended up with a cross-gen statue. Where is it? I've told this story before. I think it's right over here. Oh, no, it's over here now. Pardon me. It's on my computer. I was rereading. This is Arwen. She's from the cross-gen book Sojourn, which was drawn by Greg Land. I can't remember who the writer was, but good book. I enjoyed it. About 10 years ago, I was rereading the book, and in there was an ad for this statue. And I said to myself, oh, I wonder if that statue's on eBay. And I looked, and sure enough, it was. And I think with shipping, it was about $20. So I put it, that $20 bid in, and there was a week to go. And I went, I'm going to get, I'm not winning that. Anything you bid on with a week to go, you never win. That's the way eBay is. But nobody else wanted this Arwen statue. So for $20, it's been mine. Which leads me into some more news this week, which is that Marvel is reprinting some of the cross-gen stuff.
Really?
I guess they want to keep the copyright. They're putting out, I think this fall, it said, cross-gen classics or something, where they're taking I forget which 4 books. I think Sojourn might be one of the. They're taking 4 books and publishing them in a little trade for like $10.
Okay.
It's like, oh, I guess they got to keep the copyright, so they have to publish something about it. But it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they have it, might as well. I mean, I don't know why they. Well, actually, I know why, but why they never even did any of the Malibu stuff. Never printing that, and it's like it's just they rush to get it and buy it, and then it's just sitting there.
Well, it turns out they rushed to get it to keep it away from DC. That's the only reason they bought it.
Yeah.
Because do you remember? Were you there at the time when they bought it?
Yes.
Because they told us, and the story was out. Story was out everywhere. Was that they bought them for their coloring department, and we were just like us in the bullpen were just like, their coloring department is a bunch of people using Photoshop. Everybody was using Photoshop then. It wasn't like you needed to spend money to buy a company to get people who were using Photoshop.
And then fire all those people and never use it. And then send me all the artwork and then tie my hands and not let me send all that artwork back.
But it turned out they had heard that DC was planning to buy them. And if DC bought them, that would put DC's market share ahead of Marvel's. So Marvel, that was why Marvel actually bought them, was to keep them out of DC's hands, so they could keep the biggest market share in comics. I bought an interesting Popeye story a while back that I thought was old, but it turns out it's new stuff. It's new stuff or new stuff spliced in. I think it's an IDW thing. I'm not sure if it's old. Yeah, IDW was doing some new Popeye stuff. I bought one of them just for their cover. But yeah, they had been doing some.
Yeah, I knew new Popeye stuff was coming out.
Yeah, is cross-gen the stuff that you did a video on last winter, Jared? The short videos where you read them and yeah, that was it. I reread my favorite cross-gen book, Negation. So I made videos where I read about 5 or 6 issues and then showed them off and gave a quick review. And I ended up doing that over a few weeks and kind of reviewed the whole Negation series, which it's just a fun series. It's too bad they never got to end it because it was a lot of fun. Yep, that's one of
Oh,
the cross-gen.
Ron Mars was the writer of Solgen for a while.
Okay, he was
He was the writer.
Sojourn was really good. I like those videos. If Marvel does a reprint, they're only doing a reprint of 4 first issues in one book. So I don't think they're going to reprint. You can find the original issues really cheap on eBay or someplace. They're not expensive. Sojourn was a good book. I enjoyed that one. Negation was my favorite. Scion was pretty good. Ruse was excellent. Kind of when it lost Mark Waid, it kind of fizzled a bit. But it was Butch. It was the best artwork I've seen Butch Geist do. Matter of fact, I saw when this cross-gen news came out. Butch Geist designed Ruse and did his layouts so every page was read across, was a double page spread. And that's real. I've seen that used as a gimmick before, and it rarely worked in my eyes. It really worked here. He did an excellent job. It was like you could follow it, the storytelling, no problem. And I saw someone on this latest cross-gen news, I forget where it was, said they'd like to see Ruse printed like Dark Horse printed Frank Miller's 300, where it's twice the size, and every page that opens up is a double page spread, then a double page spread on this side. I was like, "Ooh, that would probably look really cool on Ruse."
Yeah. I know I bought a few issues, but for the life of me, I can't remember which one that I read. I don't think I went back to many of them. I probably bought all the first issues when it came out to try them.
Right.
But none of them, as I'm looking at the titles are familiar, but none of them is jumping out of me as like, oh, that was the one that I enjoyed.
Yeah, The Path was a pretty good one. That was Bart Sears, I think. But that was a later one. But what I did is I didn't buy all the first issues. I bought all the 5th issues. Because sometimes when it's like I don't even feel like trying first issues because they're to me sometimes the first issue is like the worst issue in the bunch because they have to introduce so much and and it's an origin. So I was like, I was just like, hey, I'm not interested. Finally, by like the 5th, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll buy some of these 5th issues. And then I went of the ones I liked. I went back and got issues 1 through 4 because they weren't hard to get.
Right.
But yeah, I was at that time. Cross-gen I was probably buying. You have to keep in mind, cross-gen were expensive books then. I think they were $3 an issue.
Yeah, they were $2.95 cover price.
Right, and this is
or at least at the one that I'm looking at.
This is in what 2002 to 2004, when everything else was at least $1 less.
No, Marvel was ready to 25.
75 cents or 70 cents.
Because Dark Horse was everything at Dark Horse was $3. Pretty much everything at Image was $3.
Yeah, but that was the top. What I mean is that was the top of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to buy a book at the top of the market, it's got to be good, and it's like and I can't buy that many at the top of the market. You know, it could be out of my budget. So it's like I couldn't buy all the cross-gen books, but I bought, a good 4 or 5 of them a month. Because at one time they probably had around 8 to 10. And some of them were just mediocre. The Path was cross-gen comic, right?
Yes.
But I'd like to see if Marvel were to be able to end and it was like 3 issues from the end. And it's who was doing it? Paul Pelletier was the artist, and Tony Bedard was the writer. Both guys who have worked for Marvel over all these years. So it's like they could easily do it.
Because I'm sure the scripts are sitting there somewhere if they were 3 issues away.
Right. So it's kind of like, But, there's no
I read Scion.
Yeah. Scion, that is.
Is it Scion?
I think it's Scion.
I think it's Scion. Yeah, because Jimmy Chung was drawing it, was penciling
Yes,
it,
yes.
and Don Hillsman was inking it, and Cesar Rodriguez was coloring it. I believe that was the book that I was buying. I believe on the art alone, because I enjoyed it so much.
Meridian was Steve McNiven.
Okay.
That was another good one. But I remember Scion is one of the ones they're not reprinting. So somebody was like, Jimmy Chung art, how are they not reprinting that one?
Yeah.
Because he's done he's still doing work for Marvel, right? He was did he do Young Avengers?
He did Young Avengers. He worked on X-Force, because I colored him on X-Force. X-Force 100. I colored, it was a, issue one, no, was it 100? There was a double size annual that I worked on, but a lot of people worked on that book. So I think 3 pages Jimmy did, because a ton of people were on that project. So that was one of the ones that I got the color over him, because I know Pond Scum did the inks on it.
Speaking of annuals, facsimile edition alert. Amazing Spider-Man #1 annual.
Ooh,
$8. I don't think I've ever read this before. I know I've read pages in it because I've read pages in it that accompanied articles about this, and all the material in the back has been reprinted 100 times. So it's like I recognize all this stuff. This has all been reprinted everywhere, but the actual story, the first Sinister Six story, I don't think I've read all the way through. And speaking of Stan Lee marketing, there's a commercial for every other book in this story. Have you guys read this one?
It had to be reprinted in Marvel. I know I read it, but it's been so long. So it's either Marvel Tales or Masterworks would have reprinted it, I would assume.
Masterworks definitely would have reprinted it, but I know.
Yeah, so I would have read it from the Masterworks.
I read it in a special edition published here in Portugal with the other firsts. I think it had the first meeting of the X-Men and the Avengers when they fight Lucifer. There's the first appearance of She-Hulk, and there's that. Sinister Six.
But it's like every few pages, all of a sudden it's like, there's the Fantastic Four. And he's like, Fantastic Four appearing in their own book monthly. Then all of a sudden, the X-Men appear in their Danger Room for a few panels. And it's like, X-Men appearing monthly. So he's really hitting the marketing heavy in this one. By 64, he definitely had it down, I have to say.
Because the annuals were the summer books. And even if you didn't buy comics, you're on holidays. There's times when you need something to do. They haven't invented video games yet. Buy the kid a comic. That's what that one will do. So let's make sure that everything character is in there. So that the kid knows what to buy next time.
So
were they also doing the ads on the bottom of the books yet?
No.
Where they had the little.
I think that was the late 60s.
Was it? Okay.
Blurb.
I was curious when the blurbs were coming on, where it was like basically written in pencil, not pencil, but a real quick little, almost like a notation in the comic books. Are you reading the X-Men yet? It's important that you do stuff like that.
This month in blah blah. Though I have to say, if I was a kid reading this in 64, I mean, it gave me a thrill just to see all these villains for the first time kind of together, teaming up. If I was a kid in 64, that must have blown my mind. I mean, Spider-Man had, just by this point, had such a colorful, interesting rogues gallery.
Right.
That it's like, you know what? DC didn't have a chance just because of the villains. Kraven, Sandman, Vulture, Doc Ock, Mysterio, Electro. And they're all kind of interesting, and they're all kind of villainous and have their own personalities. And I'm like, wow, I never realized that before, reading this, them all kind of in the same room. I'm like, that must have been a really exciting moment.
I would guess so, because the closest thing that would come to mind at DC, and I don't even know if they had it yet, would be the Flash's Rogue Gallery.
Yeah.
As far as colorful and interesting characters who were very different from each other would be the
I've
closest
generally,
thing.
but the problem, like I said, the difference I think between DC Rogues Gallery and like the Marvel Rogues Gallery here in this issue is they're not based on gimmicks. So the DC, especially the Flash's Rogues Gallery was always gimmick based. So just seeing these guys here is like, you know what? They're not really gimmick based at all. They all have interesting powers and different powers, and nobody's got a cold gun and a heat gun and a mirror gun. Like Mirror Master, talk about a gimmick.
Mhm.
I mean, Mysterio isn't that much different than Mirror Master in that he's got a whole group of gimmicks.
Right.
So you don't see him as a gimmick that much. But also, this is one of the issues that my whole life I've heard and read people say this is their favorite issue of Spider-Man. And now I can really see why it is, because it was just a lot of fun. Like even this back stuff, like this stuff is actually, like, I've seen all this stuff. It's been reprinted over and over. I think this stuff has been reprinted more than the comic itself. Because I
Right.
get, whenever you need a couple pages of Spider-Man stuff, you throw this in the back.
And every title was doing something similar to that.
Yeah. But he's got all this, the Secrets of Spider-Man comes from here, which, like I said, I've seen this reprinted all sorts of places. Spider-Man Spidey Senses, like all this stuff that I've seen my whole life in a bunch of different reprints, all come from this one book. And of course, in the back, it's also got how Stan Lee and this story. That's, once again, I've seen this story reprinted more times.
Yeah.
But man, imagine being a kid in 1964 and getting this. This is all the gateway you need.
Yep, especially if you might have already been reading Spider-Man
Yeah.
and know who those characters are, because it leads up so well because they introduced each one of them, and then here comes an annual that they're all together, and they've probably never
Right.
done that before, where you would have all the villains. You always had a bunch of superheroes coming together, but to have a bunch of villains come in, and then villains that almost destroyed him the last time,
Yeah.
each individual one. And to have them all team up, I think that in itself is a great idea.
Yeah, I have to say I was really impressed by this. As a piece of Stan Lee marketing, as a piece of fun, as a comic book, this is a terrific facsimile edition to get your hands on. And it ties in with everything we've been talking about for the last few weeks.
Oh yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah, because this might be the pinnacle of early 60s Stan Lee marketing.
And that same year, how many annuals came out that month?
64, a lot of them did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 64 had more annuals.
Was that also the wedding of Reed and Sue?
No, I don't think so. I think that was
that was a year later, I think.
Okay. Because again, there's another book that has tons of characters in it as almost advertisement.
Yeah,
60.
Sinister Six came out a month after the first Masters of Evil, and that was also a bunch of villains coming together, because the Masters of Evil were made up of each of the Avengers' individual villains.
Ah. Yeah, I think this is the year 64 was when Paulo was talking about, what was that, Mike's Minutia website? What was that? When Paulo was talking about a few weeks ago, I think he sent us a link to it, and it had an article on all the annuals. What was that?
Minutia. They had the promo for the 62 annuals featuring the Teenage Humor titles.
And they also had something on all these annuals from this year, 64, from this summer, where it went over all of them. So I really had fun reading this one. I was looking forward to it because, like I said, all my life I've heard multiple times how this is old timers' favorite Spider-Man issue. So I must say, it really, I can see why. I
Yeah, I
can
could
see
definitely see
why.
picking that up next time I'm actually in a comic book shop.
Yeah. Better call and reserve it. Who knows how many I mean, an $8 facsimile edition, I doubt there's many shelf copies.
Mm,
That's always the problem.
true. Well, next time I'm at Midtown, I'll check it out and pick it
Yeah,
up, and
Midtown.
hopefully I'll actually read it and not put it into my pile.
Your pile o' stuff.
Which I have a bag ready.
All right. Want to show us what's in it? Let's go.
All right,
Let's
let's
see.
open this one up. This one is
What
sealed
you
with tape.
guess what
So
year it's from? What year you got, Paolo? 2021, 2020, 2019? I'd say 2019.
all right, let's see if I can spot the year first.
They don't put the years on the covers anymore.
They do not. Okay, so this says 20. So
2020?
2020, or at least
Ooh.
this Superman book.
Ah, okay. Let's get you solo so you can show them off.
Okay, so we got the Superman book.
Cool.
We have Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles, because
Oh, a
I
crossover.
love a crossover.
You do.
I'm a sucker for
He loves his
crossovers.
Power Rangers, he loves his Ninja Turtles, and he loves his crossovers.
Exactly. These had multiple covers.
Oh, you bought multiple
So I
covers
got
of them.
multiple of them, because here's the other cover
Uh-huh.
and another cover.
Wow. You're really into that crossover.
I
How
am.
often do you buy multiple covers now?
Not really all that much. It has to be something either very special or just something that grabs me. Also, I just like these covers with just the big headshots.
Okay.
There's just something about them holding the helmets that I like. Plus, this is also it's very similar to Tin, and I'm a sucker for Tin. I don't know what it is. Gogo Power Rangers, which is a sister book.
Uh-huh.
Okay. That was 26 and this is 28. So it had to be in between getting books. It's another Ninja Turtle one with the cover, a different cover. So this stash, although there's a lot of them, are mostly just different covers of the same thing. So is Michelangelo?
Now, is it multiple issues though of different covers too?
I think they're the same issue. But what I think happened was I went in and bought the first issue, the second issue, the third issue, all at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So multiple issues of like 3 issues, multiple covers each.
Right. Okay, so this is issue 2, but it's all 4 turtles holding the yellow Power Ranger helmet. So that's what this group is.
You're the reason they're making all those multiple covers.
I am, or at least I was, because I've stopped this. Because again, this was during the time I was making money, and and in comics we don't always make money. So in this one, this group that are holding the red Power Ranger helmet is issue 1, and it's all 4 turtles holding each of it. So this is where I'm, unless I find another bag. This was issues 1 and 2 that came out, and I'm guessing when I went in, 2 was already on the stands, so I just grabbed 1 and 2. So the stash is mainly just Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles issue 1, issue 2, issue 45, and then Gogo Power Rangers 26 and 28. So there's only maybe 5 to 6 comic books individually, and then the one Superman book.
What was going on at Superman?
I think this is where he reveals his his identity to the world.
That Superman book reminds me of one of the points I wrote down in my note. Sometimes I just think of things. I'm like, I should bring these up so I write them down. Here's a weird question. A weird thought, a weird idea. For years and years, Crisis on Infinite Earths. We all know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for years and years, we would say pre-crisis or post-crisis. We still say, Paulo says it all the time. But I'm like, but all of a sudden it struck me, no one calls what's happening right now post-crisis anymore. And I'm like, when did post-crisis end? Pre-crisis is easy because it's before crisis. When did we stop using post-crisis to refer to new comics?
With the New 52.
Was it with the New 52? Because I don't remember many people saying post-crisis, but I think the New 52 definitely put the nail in it. The New 52 definitely said no one called anything post-crisis after the New 52. You're right about that.
Yeah,
but I don't think it got used much before then.
0 Hour is still post-crisis. They didn't really change anything in terms of chronology, and then it just kept going. They introduced some Silver Age concepts because Mark Waid liked them, but that's okay. That was okay. There's still that continued, but when they did Final Crisis, that was it. Final Crisis ended the post-crisis DC universe.
So Final Crisis was right before New 52?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was... that just... Because, I don't pay that close of attention to DC continuity. But now...
Flashpoint was after Final Crisis, because Flashpoint is a bunch of Elseworlds.
But now... The New 52 is over. So is it because I noticed the new thing they're coming out with is Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's the new series that's coming out now. And I'm like, because the new what was it that wasn't it? Didn't they have that? Wasn't Doomsday? The Watchmen sequel, wasn't that supposed to end the New 52? Except then it was leaked.
Yeah, but they kind of messed that up. It doesn't really count.
Is the New 52 over though? Because the New 52 is over, right?
I believe so.
Yes, I don't know. The thing is, what they're doing nowadays is everything that shows up in the DC universe is a threat to the multiverse.
Oh yeah.
So I don't. That makes people not care.
I was just curious. I was just thinking about that because I thought the same thing. New 52 definitely put an end, but I don't remember many people saying post-crisis to refer to like in the years leading up to the New 52. But the New 52 was a definite boundary line that said we're never gonna. Post-crisis is over. Even if it died a few years ago, it's officially dead now. But I don't know if there's a name for DC right now continuity, like they're like pre-crisis, post-crisis, New 52.
Yeah, I don't know what the current thing is, but sadly it's because I haven't read any of it, so I'm not even.
Yeah, I haven't read much either.
Where they're up to it. But back to this issue. This is when he reveals his identity to the world. One of my favorite pages is where he reveals it to Perry White, and it's silent. So it's basically Clark walks in, he has something to tell him, he shows him his shirt, and then he gets a hug. And I believe, I'm not sure if it's in this issue, I believe after that he gets fired. Because it is technically a conflict of interest.
Good evening, Horror Mike. How you doing tonight? And there was and I also noticed they're bringing back, who is this? Dynamite is bringing back Darkwing Duck and the Gargoyles. couple of comics that were, way after my time in terms of being kids comics, but they're coming. I guess those
We
90s kids want their childhood comics back.
Yeah, the comics were popular. We did pretty well with
Yeah.
Gargoyles and the Disney Afternoon comics. They were very popular. They didn't last too long, but I remember going to conventions and then we had the cast of Gargoyles and we had a giant gargoyle in the booth at the San Diego Comic Con. And since the
Ah.
cast of Gargoyles was mostly the Next Generation cast, we had a lot of people
Oh,
at the
wow.
booth that year. Funny enough, that particular cover, there was some back and forth between me and Disney on that cover because they kept insisting that we do not call Gargoyles a Disney book. Gargoyles is part of Buena Vista Television.
Oh, this cover right here?
That cover, that was by
Joe Madureira,
Joe
Jimmy
Madureira.
Palmiotti.
Joe Madureira, Jimmy Palmiotti did that cover.
I can make out their signatures.
And that was, again, they kept drilling to us Buena Vista Television. That's not a Disney. That's not a Disney book. I don't even think the Disney logo is on the cover of that.
It's not.
And but we had the Disney books. Now the original artwork
in the cartoon. If the cartoon as a distributed by Buena Vista logo at the end, it's a Disney cartoon. That's what we all said at the time.
Right, but this is what was drilled to us. But what Disney said. So the original artwork to Marvel comic books went back to the artist that worked on them, but the Disney books did not. The Disney books needed to be sent to Disney, except for Gargoyles. That was allowed to go back to the artist till about almost done with the series. And then all of a sudden get a call from Disney going, hey, where's the artwork for Gargoyles? It's like, Gargoyles is a Buena Vista project. That went back to the artist. Oh, we have to get it back from the artist. It's like, that's probably not going to happen because I'm pretty sure the artist already sold so that artwork. So
they wanted the original art?
They wanted the original art. Because again, part of the licensing was the Disney artwork goes back to Disney.
Right.
Does not go to the artist. So again, you're telling us this one thing every time we advertise Gargoyles, every time we went to conventions, and because it was under that Buena Vista, not Disney, because that's what they kept harping about. All of a sudden, it's like, well, it's technically Disney. It's like, well, technically nothing. That artwork went back. It's like, can you call the artist and get it back for us? It's like, no, that is not happening. You can contact the artist and expect to pay for the art if you want it back. And then I never heard anything from it again after that. Because it was basically once we said, hey, you told us this is what the contract said, though I never saw the contracts myself.
Yeah.
This is what I was told to do with the artwork. This is what I did with the artwork. And then all of a sudden, someone realized a mistake was made somewhere. And it's like, you're not tossing me under the bus.
Wasn't my mistake.
Wasn't my mistake. This is what I did. If you want to call the artist, and I may or may not had called the artist to warn them, hey, you may get a call from Disney. Please be aware. You're allowed to ask them to buy it from you. Don't just give it away. And I never heard anything from that. And that's the sad part of that story. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if they ever called the Gargoyle artists to and cause any problems. I'm going to imagine they didn't, because I did tell each one of them, if there's a problem, call me. We can see what we can do from there. Because, again, don't let them strong arm you, because this was their edict at first. Buena Vista is not. And I know I had it in writing somewhere that said the Gargoyles artwork can go back to the artist.
Interesting. Yep. The ins and outs of comic books.
Yes.
Here's one I want to point out that's going to be on my pull list. The Approach right there, that airplane one. I just found out about it here. It's because Jeremy Hwan is the writer. And he's an artist too, but he did a book called, he was one of the co-writers on The Beauty, which I enjoyed. and he was and he was the writer on something called Red Mother, which I really liked a lot. Came out a couple of years ago. So now it's from Boom. When airport employees Mac and Abigail find themselves snowed in after a blizzard, they witness a terrible plane crash. After pulling a survivor from the wreckage, they realize a terrifying truth. This plane has been missing for 27 years. The nightmare has only begun, though, as the people trapped in the airport soon find themselves confronted by what this plane actually brought back, and then we approach number one. He did a really good job with Red Mother. I forget who the artist was on that. He did a really good job, too. But Red Mother was sort of this mysterious Rosemary's Baby type story of this woman who, like in the first issue, her boyfriend was like dragged into a some sort of crypt they were walking by in New York, and she lost an eye in it somehow. Then all this, it was just, I don't even remember the conclusion of the story was something like, demons did it or whatever. But the creepiness of like the 10 or 12 issues like the creepiness of the journey along the way is what I liked a whole lot. So I'm going to give that one a try when it comes out in October.
Cool. Very cool.
I like it when I actually find a comic I want to get in comic shop usually, because it doesn't happen that often.
Mm-hmm. I would go through previews because it's just such a big book, and just trying to figure out what's going on. It's like there's so much stuff out there, and a lot of times nothing really jumps out to me in it. Because sometimes I'll see something where it's like, oh, that's cool for nostalgic reasons. But other than that, there hasn't been anything that would pop out. Or I would find something really strange and go, I think I would try that, and never see it.
Yeah.
Never see it out there.
I can remember, I haven't gone through previews regularly since the 90s. Just because I would find too much stuff. I'd always get depressed because it was like, I'd be like, oh, that looks cool. That looks cool. That looks, especially in the 90s. And I would have to spend, 5 times as much money as I spend in order to get all the weird little comics that looked good, at least in previews. So I kind of gave that up. Now I look through Comic Shop Weekly and whatever else, YouTube I hear things from. And I go, I'll try an issue of this. I'll try an issue of that. There's a new one, Damn Them All by Simon Spurrier and Charlie Adlard. I have to say, Charlie Adlard is one of like the unsung heroes of the comic book industry, because he drew so many issues of The Walking Dead, always on time, always drew them well, always did a good job of it. They were always good, and no one ever said The Walking Dead was his. No one ever said Charlie Adlard and Robert Kirkman's Walking Dead. He never got any credit for drawing so many issues in a row so well, month in, month out, without fail. No, the book's on hiatus. I got my Walking Dead issue some occasionally twice a month. Every month, occasionally twice a month. Always there. And I'm just like, but no one ever says Charlie Adlard is there. No one ever says Charlie Adlard is good. No one ever mentions him. I always find that amazing.
Because Charlie Adlard never had a run in a big 2 superhero.
Yeah.
Okay. Vertigo.
Yeah, he only did Walking Dead was, but you'd think as big as The Walking Dead was, Tony Moore gets mentioned more than Charlie Adlard. And Tony Moore did 6 issues?
Something like that, yeah. I wonder if it's one of those things there was like, he was taken for granted.
Yeah.
People who came in and was used to the artwork, they were so invested in the story.
Right.
Not realizing how much the artwork is contributing to the story.
Right. They were so into the plot.
Yeah.
That they didn't know how, a completely unsung hero of the comics industry. Like I said, that book was on top for a decade.
Yeah.
And you can't do that without Charlie Adlard. You just can't. If that book had a rotating series of artists, it would have probably fizzled out in half the time. So it's just amazing to me that he gets no credit, no kudos. And he's to me, he's like a hero of the comics industry. Just the fact that he did it so long, so well. That I think he's nobody's favorite artist. He's the Sal Buscema of indie books in the 2000s. Everybody likes Sal Buscema,
Yeah, but I understand what you mean by
but he's
that.
nobody's favorite. Everybody likes John Buscema better. Everybody likes John Byrne better. Everybody likes George Perez better. We're okay with Sal Buscema. All of us have read tons of Sal Buscema books. Like them.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of also like Paul Ryan. That here's someone that's the body of work that he did, but people would say, why did he always get work? It's because he always was on time,
Yeah.
no matter what. His art wasn't blowing anything up, blowing people away or anything like that, but it was consistent. I think if we did romance books, I think he would have been like the top tier artist on romance books. But here's an artist who was on Fantastic Four for a long time, but he was always constant. But when we talk about runs of like the Fantastic Four, we mostly go right to John Byrne's run.
Yeah.
That was the big name for that, and then everyone else kind of like after it. But I don't know if John did more books than Paul did.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I have no idea what was the run count on books like that. And unfortunately, Marvel has printed so many comic books that
Yeah.
eventually, you're not, especially in the 90s, if you delivered pizza, there was a good chance you could have got a book out of it. So, so again, there were more books, there were more titles than artists,
Yeah.
at that time.
Just what issue did Walking Dead end at? 192?
I do not know the number. I only started in the very beginning for a little while and then just stopped with it.
I bought it all the way through. Matter of fact, the most read copy of Walking Dead #1 is Jacob Chabat's.
Really?
Because Jacob Chabat bought, I think it was 1 and 2 off the stands. And he brought them into the bullpen. It was like, check out this new book. It's really cool. And like everybody in the office read Jacob's copies. And that was when issue 3 was the first one I picked up. And I'm like, I'm not paying $20 for issue 1 that came out just a few months ago. Forget it.
Mm-hmm.
So I never got 1 and 2 except in trade. I was like, forget $20 for a book that came out 2 months ago? No way. Not that I saw it anywhere for $20, but that was the price it was going for. I never actually saw a copy, anyone selling a copy, but I knew that's how much it went for. But yeah, Jacob, 25 people must have read Jacob's copy.
That's fascinating in itself, where you bring a book to a comic book company and everybody is reading through that book.
Yeah.
The closest thing I've heard to that was because at Marvel we used to have tours, and we did have during Fleet Week we had a bunch of soldiers come in, and so we had a bunch of sailors talking about how one person had gotten a copy of Wolverine's Origin. And he said that book went through the whole ship because every time someone finished it, there was another person right after it to read it. Like the book was never put down.
Right.
That it always stayed in somebody's hand because the moment someone else read it, it just went through that one copy went through the whole ship. And I thought that in itself is fascinating.
And speaking of wasting money on gimmick comics.
Ooh, I love 3D comics.
Oh,
Crossover 3D special. Who published that?
How much did this cost me? That's weird. I have to put my reading glasses on in these. $8.99. $8.99. But really, bugging my eyes out too. Man, does this but full color 3D.
Oh, okay.
Man, it's the first issue of Crossover done in 3D. And wow, it's a lot of. I have to move my eyes slowly.
Who published that?
and let the 3D kind of roll over me and hold my eyes still. And it's kind of cool. And then I take these off and go, whoa, head trip, man. But yeah, crossover 3D special. Just, I love gimmicks like that. I love 3D comics are so cool, even if they read terribly. You can't read them, you just got to look at them. Do you get any 3D comics over there in Portugal, Paolo?
I'm sure we do, but I wouldn't pay attention if one came out. As far as gimmicks go, I have zero interest in that one.
Yeah, if you don't like the gimmick, there is no reason to get this.
The last time I paid attention to something with 3D on it, it was the back of the back of the cardboard in some cereal I was eating.
This might be the first full color 3D comic I've gotten. Because usually the ones I get are, the blue and red line. They're not full color. So I can't remember getting another full color one. So that, of course, was cool.
Was Iron Man Crash in 3D?
No, that was just
that was just
computer generated.
Okay, so I'm thinking that off the top of my head, 3D might be one of the oldest gimmicks in comics.
Jack Adler invented it for DC. Remember we were talking about Jack Adler before? And I was reading that. I think Paolo, whoever, one of you two found it and sent the Jack Adler link to an interview with him. Because I was like, there's got to be interviews with Jack Adler out there. He was around so long. But so it was like from the early 2000s, maybe, an interview with Jack Adler. And first of all, he complained that his boss, Saul Harrison, took a lot of credit for the things he came up with. And one of the things he came up with was 3D comics. One of his bosses asked him if he knew how to do 3D comics. And he said, sure. And then he went out and figured out how to do 3D comics. Because I think Saul Harrison was the head production guy. And Jack Adler was underneath him. He was Jack Adler's, but Jack Adler was the second in line production guy. And he eventually, I think when Saul Harrison retired sometime, Jack Adler took over the head production. That was they were both there for decades.
I know there was definitely a Superman 3D book, because I'm pretty sure I actually have, or at least a reprint of it, not the original one.
I can only remember some pages in Black Dossier, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Okay, I'll have to look. I have that. I'll have to look. I have the original one. The last 3D comic I bought was Valiant in the 90s. It was some full color thing, and the glasses worked with every other comic. And he put the glasses on, look at any comic, start to separate.
And then again, with Valiant, it was easy because Solar was already red. So he didn't really need much to be added to him to make him mimic a 3D look.
Right.
Because I think the Valiant ones may have still been in color.
Although, have you either of you guys ever seen the first printing of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Black Dossier?
No,
I don't believe so.
Because the trade.
Only the first printing of the hardcover got made the way Alan Moore wanted it made, which means it's got like a dozen different paper stocks. I think it may even have 3D pages, like he said. I don't remember that, but if he says, it's probably in there. And, a bookmark, just all the different printing techniques and on all the different stocks of paper is kind of amazing just to see. But it was too expensive to do, so from then on, they just said, screw all that. But if you can get your hands on one of the first printings, it's really interesting.
I remember that. I think the only thing they didn't let him put in the book was a vinyl.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why he left Wildstorm.
Right.
They didn't let him do that Black Dossier like he wanted, so he moved to Top Shelf to continue League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
And after I read, I don't know a ton about British pop culture. So after I read that, my friend Bunch had to explain all the British pop culture references to me because he knows he's like really into it. So I was like, he's like, oh, and that is that. Oh, and that. I was like, oh, okay. I missed it all, but still enjoyed it. I understood who James Bond was. And Emma Peel and her partner's name just flew out of my head. The Avengers.
John Steele.
Yeah, there we go. John Steele.
Oh, I used to watch the Avengers when I was a kid. We had this show where we could pick they would show us snippets from two different series, and we would pick the one that we wanted to see, and we would have to call a number. Of course, I was not allowed because it was 7. But yeah, I saw the Avengers that way.
And mentioning James Bond brings us to another Aftershock graphic novel size one, Jimmy's Little Bastards, which is Garth Ennis and Russ Braun. They did a series called Jimmy's Bastards before this, which was regular comic size, and you can get in trade paperback. This is from Aftershock, which is funny. I bought the first issue of that and was gonna put it on my pull list, but somehow never did. So I was like, oh, this is going to be a 3-issue one, 40 pages an issue for $8. So it's about the price of a regular comic, a regular Marvel or DC comic, which is 20 pages for $4. But it's a James Bond kind of super violent Garth Ennis parody. Jimmy is a James Bond type character, and in this one, it takes place after whatever happened in the other one. He's kind of retired. He's fat, happy, and retired now. And this is his angry daughter who had to become the new 007. And is a little pissed about it, because she's still having to clean up messes that he made 20 years ago. So she's back trying to recruit him into helping her out clean up one of these messes. And it's fun and funny. Russ Braun is a good artist. Good storyteller. So Garth Ennis, Russ Braun, James Bond parody-ish. Yeah, and since it's Garth Ennis, it's going to be full of violence and cursing, so all that good stuff. But just didn't even know this was coming. It's funny. I never know. I like to pick the Aftershock ones up at this size because, first of all the comics are like $5 now. These ones are actually cheaper at $4. Now, well, it's $8 for two, kind of a double issue. I feel like I get better value out of these. Plus, I don't really like square bound comics, but at the magazine size, it's okay. It works for me. Paolo, that show sounds like a crazy version of Reed Slippin'.
Not quite like that. Much more mundane. Yeah, it would be something like snippets of the Avengers versus snippets from The Love Boat. And next week they would show bits from. It would be an episode of Soap versus an episode of Buck Rogers. Or sometimes they would do 2 episodes of a sitcom, because sitcoms were 25 minutes, so they would get Archie Bunker and Happy Days together in one block, and we would have to choose that one or the A-Team, something like that. And when we were waiting for the votes to be tallied, we would watch a cartoon, and by the end of the cartoon, they would have all the votes tallied, and we would see the full episode that was chosen by the audience.
That's fascinating, having like an interactive television show, pretty much. That's like, I don't know if we ever had anything even like that.
What was the one my mother used to tell me about when she was a kid? Was it Rinky Dink? It might have been Portuguese Institution.
Yeah, he remembers. Between around 1986 and 1989, on on the second channel at about 3:30 in the afternoon. And,
Phone
and,
Jared's landline to vote for what comic to dolphin.
and we could watch it because at the time we didn't have school all day. We had either school in the mornings or school in the afternoons, and I always had it in the mornings. So we would have school from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. We would leave, go to have lunch, finish homework in a rush, so we could watch that show.
There's a TV show my mother has told me about when she was a kid. I think it used to be called Rinky Dink, where if you were into it, you had to buy a special kit, which was a piece of cellophane you put over your TV. And then they'd have stuff like Rinky Dink was like a little animated feature. I think, or maybe that was part of it within a show. And be like, oh no, the bridge is out. Draw the bridge to help Rinky Dink cross it. So you'd have to draw the bridge on the cellophane with a piece of, I don't know, wax crayon or something. And then Rinky Dink would run it. But she never had the cellophane. So Rinky Dink would just like run across the air to the other side. I'm sure that's what it was for most kids. But it was like, wow.
Winky Dick and You was a CBS children's television show that aired from 1953 to 1957.
Winky Dink with a W? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Wow.
Because I never hear about that one. I've never heard about that one except from my mother.
No, the closest thing I ever heard was about how you had companies selling various colored paper to put on your television sets.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were the TVs were black and white. So this kind of rainbowish paper that's transparent, you would put it on your screen to almost mimic color. But it was just, it was just a scam that was there to put some kind of color on your television set.
Yeah.
But the game aspect, that's some Captain Planet stuff, that we not Captain Planet, Captain Power.
It was interactive. You had to draw that bridge to get Winky Dink across.
That's actually pretty cool in itself.
Yeah. Well, my mother, like, we never had it. Couldn't afford it. Always wanted it. And kids, and she said there were stories of kids drawing right on the screen,
I could see that as well. I could definitely see that
imagine.
as well. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and here's, speaking of price, here's Jinx, which Paolo was just talking to one of the creators of this, Joe Corallo, this is an Archie horror story. It's an anthology with 3 stories and a framing sequence around it. And the middle story was written by Joe Corallo, who Paolo was on Graphic Man's channel with on Wednesday night, right?
Yeah.
So pretty fun. But the story behind me getting this one was there were 2 comics though, because I ended up being that I got Jimmy's Bastards, what's the Spider-Man facsimile edition, and the 3D. Those are 3 like $8 or $9 books. So I ended up spending quite a bit. I think it was $45 was my bill at the comic shop this week, which is because I got all those double-sized books. But I also saw a couple of shelf stuff that interested me. One was a Vault comic. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember it had a post-apocalyptic woman on the cover. Looked nice. Liked the art inside, but that was a $5 book. Then this one I liked too. I liked the cover. I liked the art inside, but it was a $4 book. I'm like, $4 book wins. Mm-hmm. Maybe if that other one's there next week and I don't have as many as expensive books on my pull, I might get it, but this one won for now. But nice stuff. Just 3 little Halloween horror stories about minor Archie characters with a framing sequence that was also nicely drawn. I like this woman's face right there. So it's her. It's this woman. Who is it? Is she Jinx? Yeah, she's Jinx. And she's babysitting 2 little kids and then telling them stories. and the one story is a Monkey's Paw story. And I like how there weren't any lessons learned. There weren't any. It was just a story, a bad story where bad things happen. So it was Kevin Tella was the other one. So good stuff. Good stuff. All a nice, fun, done in one Archie horror comic, which are kind
Yeah,
of all ages comics, if not skewing a little older.
yeah, because Jinx, I recall being a little girl character, kind of
Yes,
like Dennis the Menace
right.
type of character. So
They mentioned that she's been around almost as long as Archie, and they've
hmm
aged her over the decades.
yes, because I just did a Google search and it's like, oh, okay, I remember her. She had the very Casper-ish artwork.
Hmm.
That cartoon style everybody was doing back
Right.
then, and that for some reason I thought she was red hair, but maybe because of Archie, I put that together. But yeah, pretty much like the character that's on the cover, but
Yeah.
aged up.
Hmm. That reminds me. Those stories reminded me of two Silver Coin, a horror title that Michael Walsh draws every issue and has a different writer each issue. Michael Walsh is just such a terrific artist and terrific storyteller. I've enjoyed. I might enjoy one issue more than the other, depending on how good I think the writing is. Michael Walsh just always knocks it out of the park. But good series overall, all done in ones. But what this issue really made me realize, I wrote a blog years ago after I read Steve Ditko Omnibus. Had some of his pre-codes horror stuff in it. And I had really never read much pre-code horror before then. Maybe 10 years ago. Who knows? And it amazed me. Have you read much pre-code horror, Wilson or Paolo?
Nope.
No, I don't believe so.
What amazed me was the freedom of thinking in the stories, kind of. Because I was used to postcode everything. And there were rules to postcode, and there was especially rules to postcode horror. Had to be a twist ending. Someone had to learn a lesson. Good always triumphed at the end. All that stuff that we're used to. But
Yep.
reading the pre-code horror one was crazy because I remember one story where the story that stands out in my mind now was there was a story of a rich old guy who was about to die and had these ungrateful children that he didn't like who stood to inherit all his money. So he was going to give his ungrateful children a test to see if they deserve to inherit his money. Now, if this were a postcode book, at the end you'd learn a lesson. The kids would inherit them. The kids would, become good and say, "Oh, my old bad behavior is behind me," and you'd learn a lesson after something almost bad happened to them. And this one, they all fail the test, and he kills all his children. End of story. And it was like, what? And it was story after story like that. They were real horror stories. There was no lessons learned. It was something really bad happens. Nothing mitigates it. It was bad. Like, any horror, like a not, and I was like, what? And it really opened my eyes to how censored stories were after the comics code. Even like well after the comics code went away, like even into the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. But besides the comics code forbidding a lot of stuff, what happened was if you were writing a non-code horror story, you'd want to put in the stuff that the code wouldn't let you. So even though you weren't under the code, you were still reacting to it. Which pre-code, nobody was reacting to anything. It was just, here comes the horror, and it's horror. There's no good in it. You know, the kids don't pass the test, they all die. Nobody gets the money because nobody lives. And there was stories like that, and I read, and they're all kind of like that. There's no lesson to be learned, which is probably why EC put in the twist ending, because they had to have some sort of end. There's like no, and that's kind of what these Jinx stories were, except they were tamer. Like the Monkey's Paw. They did a Monkey's Paw story. And all Monkey's Paw stories are kind of the same, where you get a monkey's paw that grants you wishes, except the wishes never work out. That's part of the Monkey's Paw story. So this woman gets the monkey's paw. The wishes don't work out. And she's like, and her last wish or whatever is like, I wish I never saw this monkey's paw. So then she goes back to her life. And at the very last panel, you see the monkey's paw is still in her purse. She's still got it. It's still cursing her. She just doesn't know it because she wished she never saw it, because it's invisible to her. So that was kind of like, and that made me realize, wow, this is really we've finally entered a post-code world. And this silver coin and the series in general made me think that too, because this one in particular was like all this crazy body horror, where the story, and it's not reacting. It's also like not like the stories that are reacting against anything. It's not one of the. I think creative people are finally done reacting against the comic code because it's been gone for so long. They're finally free of the censorship of the comics code and free of reacting to the comics code because it's just been that long. Like this story was just this guy meets a girl, gets her pregnant, then he tries to get out of it. They find the silver coin. The woman starts having these hallucinations where her giant baby is attacking her. There's like nothing good in this. There's nothing redeeming. It's just like horror. The car crash, so the husband, the baby father dies in a car crash when he doesn't. The baby is finally born and is a monster. The baby's born, and then it ends with the baby dies the night it's born, but you see all these other babies are haunted by the silver coin, and they all grow up to be horrible killers. And then it ends with where is it? There's just a panel with her grown up going, oh, I'm miserable now. So it's like we're completely in an uncensored post-code world now, and I first noticed it with these two issues. But because we're back to pre-code stuff where you just write crazy stories. They don't need to learn a lesson. Nobody needs to be redeemed.
I'm curious if it's because also did these people who are the creators of those not grow up with the code at all? Because it is, like, as you mentioned, it's been long enough. It's like I never thought about writing a horror story, and I'm pretty sure the first thing I would do is probably think about the code.
Right.
Because it's been so integrated.
You think about what you can't do.
Right.
Well, even without the code, I'm sure there are some people thinking that they want to get into TV, and and even on Netflix, you can't just go around killing children,
cursing babies to be killers.
I suppose there's some people started reading comics in the last 15 years.
Yeah,
without the code, they're going to stop reacting to it.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
you'd have to go to Mike Diana's stuff, so there's probably some indie comics out there, but even they were that out there.
Hmm.
But
Even a lot of the
it's pretty cool.
even a lot of the uncoded stuff from the 80s, 90s I read. It's like, oh, let's do stuff we can't do in the comics code. So the comics code was still there, affecting them. I don't think it's affecting. So I found that interesting. Listen, I wrote that blog like 10 years ago. Now I'm like, I think we're out of that era of the comics code affecting anyone in any way.
It's fascinating in itself
Yeah.
because I had thought back in 2000 that I remember having a conversation with a couple of artists, wondering what would the comics landscape be like if we never had the code.
Yeah.
Because that's because we know stories about what the pre-code world was
It
like.
would be. I think it would be more like Japan, where you
Okay.
have comics for grown-ups.
Yeah.
Comics were infantilized over here. Yeah, we all know growing up reading comics, you were, people thought you were mentally a child if you read comics.
Hmm.
It was really like that.
Yeah. There was no real. I would read comics on the bus, and I would read comics on the train. But it was
Hmm.
one of those things. Is like I knew while I was reading it, someone was going to say something, and eventually the turnaround was I remember being on a bus reading a comic book, and someone was like, "Oh, can I read one of them?" Because
Yeah.
it's a long ride and whatnot. And my kind of thing is like, well, yeah, I'll let you read one, but in my mind, my little thing is like I didn't want anyone reading my books until I read them first.
Oh yeah.
And that was just one of the things that I had is like my brothers knew when I came
You
home.
were not the only one like that.
Yeah.
I knew other
So
people like that.
yeah, so it's like I got to read my books first, and then you can read them. You can read what I've already read, but I'm not going to let you read what I haven't read yet.
I started bringing comics to the office to read at lunch. You can do that now. As a matter of fact, it was Sleepy Reader who was just telling a story. He's a few years older than me. About how he went to high school. He said, this is true of me him in the early 70s, me in the late. You just didn't tell people you read comics. In general, he said there was a guy a friend of his from high school who he talked to every day, who he didn't know read comics till they were in their late 20s.
Yeah, I was funny. I read comics junior high, no problem. I went to two different high schools. So in the ninth grade, I went to Evander Charles High School in the Bronx, which at that time and now worst high school in the Bronx. And I was reading comics at lunchtime, and everyone around me did not like the idea that I read comics. There was just something wrong about reading comics. And yet, here I am sitting in the lunchroom,
Mm-hmm.
and there are murals painted on the wall, and Nightcrawler is painted there. The Dave Cockrum Nightcrawler is staring at me, and it's like, how? And I don't know the story behind the mural. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that part of the lunchroom had a mural, it had a space motif, and Nightcrawler was clearly there. But I had people teasing me there. And then I transferred out and went to the High School of Art and Design, which is where I wanted to go in the first place. But a mixed up in junior high school ended up sending me to a regular high school for a year. And then art and design, everybody was reading comics. Even those who didn't want to draw comics was the whole school was pretty much reading comics. What they were all reading was all different stuff, so I got to see a little bit of everything from each group that I would hang out with, and completely different world when you find your people, I guess is
Yeah.
basically it. And that's kind of how it is. And it's amazing to watch how easy people are talking about what they bought this week on TikTok.
Yeah.
There's no shame in it where they were for a while. You just didn't tell anybody because you didn't want to deal with the whole thing of I don't even want to have this conversation because we all had that conversation of
Right.
why do you still read comics? And it's like that's an exhausting conversation to have.
I
I
like
don't
to.
even bother talking about it
Right.
anymore.
It's like my one friend who I still have from high school, Rob, who pre-COVID I met at the comic shop every week. Like I've known him since high school. We both collected comics in high school. And one day, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were at the comic shop meeting up every week, chatting for a while. And I look on the back, and I think I see another guy who we went to high school with. And I'm like, "Hey, is that you're Andy, right?" He's like, "Hey," and we went to high school with this guy for 4 years. He was, I guess, one of the cool. He was a football player guy, athlete. We went to him for 4 years. We went to high school with him. Never knew he read comics because you just didn't say. I mean, Rob and I would talk to each other about comics, but I guess he didn't talk to anyone about comics, and we didn't talk. But it was just amazing. I'm like, how did we not know he collected comics? But you didn't say anything
Yeah.
in 1980 to 1984 in high school. If you collected comics, you kept it quiet.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Or when you did have certain friends you could talk to about comics,
Yeah.
but certain time of day. So we weren't talking about comics at lunchtime because other people could hear us talking about comics.
Right.
It's like it's just a strange thing that
Yeah.
it's like you could almost see why that there's this disconnect with
Mhm.
fans where
Right.
it's like, oh, we went through so much crap, and now everyone's reading comics, and it's like, you don't know the kind of crap we had to go through, or it's like, yeah, I guess in ways some of us open doors for other people. It's like, yeah, come and
I
talk about comics, and
I think that's also why a lot of older fans, especially, use the phrase "fake fan" when talking about women,
yeah,
because 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 all through the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, if a woman was interested in comics, it was probably because she was trying to sell you something.
mm,
And it was like they weren't there was that's what marketers learned to do. They learned, well, of course they use pretty women to sell everything.
right.
But
We had
they'd use pretty women to sell things to comic fans.
there was a long time of the booth babes
Yeah,
at
yeah.
conventions where they
Uh-huh.
didn't know anything about comics, but they were trying to sell something at the booth.
Yeah.
And again, but I was lucky, like I mentioned, art and design, everyone's
Yeah.
reading comics, even the
And not
girls.
many high schools like
You know,
that.
yeah, not at all.
Just the
You know,
one.
pretty much.
Up and let's see. Comic Crack is into Sandman Mystery Theater at lunch. I read that bit of that one in the 90s. I enjoyed it. For horror and crime, the code stifled creativity. The horror stuff post code was pretty bland until the 70s. It was pretty bland in the 70s too. They opened it up a little bit, but it was still House of Mystery. Houses. We always called those mystery books and not horror books. There was, I mean, hide your comics underneath your porn. Yeah. I'm glad that has changed. I didn't know many people that collected comics, but you didn't have to have kind of extreme reactions that I've heard story. Oh yeah, you get beaten up. I've heard of people, not me, because I was too athletic. The people who tried to beat me up didn't do it twice. But my friend Rob, yeah, he could get picked on physically for liking comics, and I've heard other stories of comic fans. I'm just lucky I was born athletic. That stopped most bullying in my case. No matter how weird an artist I was, I could take you out. Especially because I was reading undergrounds and indies, so the reception was different. Wow, some of my friends who didn't have any interest even dipped into. You must have hung out with the burnouts and stoners, I'm guessing. If they were into underground,
There's no peer pressure. It was really the parents and the teachers who didn't want you to read comics. But then again, in a country that has the worst reading habits of Western Europe, trying to criticize me for you should move on to the other books. What do you mean move on to the other books? I read the other books at the same time I read comics. You're the ones who don't read anything, you idiots.
Yeah, my mom saw a change in my reading level, and my teachers did also once I got into comics. So I didn't have the story of my mom threw out my comics because No, she saw that I was reading comics, but
Yeah.
not only comics. So, and then I'm starting to read novels. And then once the teacher said, "Oh, he's paying more attention in class, especially book reports and stuff like that." Absolutely right.
Stoner skaters and punk. I knew if they were liking the underground stuff, who they were.
Mhm.
Booth Babe's still active at horror cons. It's more low key, but they're still there. I think at Comic Cons they've been replaced by cosplayers.
Yeah, pretty much because I even had cosplayers at my booth when I had them for Section 8 comics, and it kind of happened by accident because the
Mhm.
way we had our booth set up, we had a chair off to the side, and a cosplayer asked, "Can I sit down?" Because she was walking whatever she had heels and stuff like that. And it's like, you can sit down there, but please hand out these flyers. And she was more than happy to be able to take a break, sit down, and hand out flyers. Yeah, the booth bays were an interesting concept because it's like the idea was to have these attractive women talk to people to try to sell them stuff, but you're trying to talk to people who don't usually talk to women in general.
Yeah.
So that kind of backfired, where they didn't really want to go to that booth because some people didn't know how to have conversations
Right.
with other people in general, because some comic book fans are, you know, people who don't really interact with other people. They'll go to the comic book shop, have a conversation because they have to in order to buy the books, and then go away. Where other people are more are will stay at a comic book shop, which I used to do for hours, just talking about comics.
Yeah, horror mice cosplayers are booth babes. They are now. They used to not cosplay. They used to just put on something skimpy and hang around and take pictures.
The thing with cosplayers and saying that they're fake, with the fake fans, is that a lot of people wanting to get into professional modeling started going to the cosplay scene.
Oh yeah,
And the majority of people who cosplay, they don't actually read. They just
right,
think that the designs are cool.
right.
So since it's a superficial interest in the character, that's where the fake fans come on. Comes from. They're not interested in the lore. They
Right.
they just care about the design. But
I'm talking more of the regular woman fans who get called fake fans.
well,
But
the
because of the booth babes, right? Because of the ones trying to sell you stuff. Where I have seen comic book fans think a booth babe was actually interested in them because of their knowledge of comics and stuff, and they're not. And that made them resent women in general.
Okay, the first time I actually went to a convention, I was 19, and that's what our art exhibits masquerading as conventions. But even at 14 or 15, I would know, yeah, that person's being paid to be there, of course. So where does the confusion come from?
The confusion comes from not everybody is as bright as you. That's where it comes from.
I mean, I knew that when we saw some people dressed up in carnivals, yeah, that person's being paid to be in the costume.
We don't have carnivals. All we had were booth babes that can like, oh, a woman who's into Wonder Woman. Look at that.
Yeah,
I'm into Wonder Woman too.
A few years ago, a guy shows up dressed as Garfield. The guy was being paid to be there. He was not a cosplayer. He was paid to act as Garfield. So I high-fived the guy because, well, he's just walking around. Nobody's paying attention to him because no little kids don't go to our comics festivals unless the parents drag them. I mean,
Wilson. Sometimes booth babes make for an awkward encounter. Comic-Con 2012 by Morgan Spurlock. Very interesting doc on this. And free on. I can't remember if I ever watched that or not. I've seen plenty of awkward Comic-Con.
I've
documentary.
been to plenty of awkward Comic Cons.
They kind of all blur. Matter of fact, is there a non-awkward Comic-Con documentary?
You know, the problem that documentary, but being at Comic Cons, it's like I had, and I'm talking about this is the early years of conventions and people dressing up. And the thing was, is that the early cosplayers, and again, early cosplayers had no.
How early? The 70s or the 90s?
No, I'm saying the 90s,
Okay.
where I was at the early cosplayers that were doing it seemed to be very rude in what they were doing. Like they would come up to your table and just put their stuff down on the table. But they weren't
Wow.
really interested in buying anything. They just wanted to put their stuff down for a minute. And they would be in costumes that they just finished painting 20 minutes ago. So if they're rubbing against your table, they're getting paint all over the table. And I remember we clearly had to tell someone that was dressed up as Robin, do you mind taking your balls off of my comic book? Because they're just like right there. And I used to, and again, this was the early days, I used to be angry with cosplayers because they would do weird things while they were walking around. Obviously, they would stop to take a picture, so they're blocking your booth.
Right.
And then mock kissing each other. Not actually kissing each other, but getting close to it. And then, like, create a whole display in front of your table, blocking everything to do these weird things, and then walk away. And then you had some. What I used to be angry about is like, wow, they spent all that time and money on making a costume, and not one of them made a pocket to carry money to buy something. But then later, you get to see the ones who started being smart about it, that they would have somebody with them. And the person with them would be their handler. So
Right.
not only would they help them, especially if they got the big costumes and they can't see anything, you had someone off to the side helping them walk through and then carrying their stuff for them, and then able to buy things and just put it in their bag. Because a lot of times they would say, oh, I can't buy anything because I'm in the costume.
Right.
But then they started to get smarter, and then there was more of a respect where it's like now they're really getting into it, where it becomes a business within the comic convention, where I saw people setting up convention cosplay first aid kits. Someone would be walking almost like a cigarette girl. Back in the in the old movies, you see the cigarette girl walking around, candy, cigarette, whatever. So they had the same type of setup, but they would have tape, glue, a sewing kit, and they would offer their services to help a cosplayer who might have accidentally ripped something or what have you. And then again, they started becoming smart about it. And the ones who became really serious about it were really into that character. Whichever character they picked,
Right.
they got really into that character, where then it became beneficial to artists to always draw that character, because chances are a cosplayer is going to buy that character. So you had a cosplayer who was always Harley Quinn. If he had a sketch card of Harley Quinn, chances are she would buy it. She wouldn't care about the Batman or anything like that, but she wanted the Harley. And again, it became something where, like I mentioned, the early days in the 90s, it was some people just looking for attention. There were some people starting out, and then others who made something of it where they became kind of professional cosplayers. And that blows my mind now that they have artist alley tables.
That fits in with my hypothesis of I really think cosplay in the 90s kind of started and took off because in high school there were always girls who liked to sew and make clothes, which was very uncool. If you were a girl who liked to sew in the 80s and 90s in high school, you were, a step above a guy collecting comics, but not that far. It's like, you were liking to sew was not a cool thing. And somehow in the 90s, they cross-pollinated with comic fans and discovered if you liked to sew and make clothes, the one place you could do it and be cool was at Comic Cons. So I think that had something to. I have no way to prove it. It's just an idea I've had for years, where I think that's what happened. Because I know those girls existed from when I was in high school and back in time. You always that was like a high school archetype who got wrote about every now and there were always girls. Usually, sometimes they'd go into fashion, but not always. But
Yeah,
they were
and
just women who liked to sew and make clothes. And I think, like I said, the Comic Cons and cosplaying became an outlet for them.
and it would make sense because I know in the 80s I had home economic classes,
Yeah,
so I learned how to sew there.
right.
And I don't know when they stopped doing that, but again, 90s being Comic Cons, I could see that growing into that. I could see, at least, as you mentioned, there's a cross pollination there.
Right. Right. Let's see. Oh, the Comic Cons. Let's see. Comic Tubi has about 25 docs on comic book art. Great selection. Oh, yeah. Du-du-du. Let's see. Have you seen the SuperCon Miami doc and the comedy they made loosely based on it? I haven't seen that one either. Turtle Power, Future Shock, and of course, Comic Book Confidential are my favorites.
I think I saw all of those he just
Oh,
mentioned.
we have to mention Tom Palmer died today.
Did he?
Yeah.
I did not hear about that. Wow.
So everybody we know on Facebook is posting.
Oh, I haven't been online all day today.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
I never met him, but
I've met
everybody
him
has
quite a
nothing
few
but nice
times.
things to say about him.
I met him quite a few times. Again, doing art returns, he was a regular at Marvel, and he came in a few times.
Yeah, somehow I
And
never ran across him. I
and
don't know why.
I always ran into him at conventions.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a
81, I
shock.
think they said he was.
Yeah, last time I saw him was Awesome Con, which is the con in Washington D.C. I think that was the last time I saw him, and that was pre-pandemic. Oh wow, that's
Greg Wright had a cool story because everybody's writing their Tom Palmer interactions and stories. And Greg Wright, colorist, artist, former Marvel editor, wrote wrote a funny one when he first started at Marvel. Shooter was the editor in chief, so it was probably the late '80s. I think he started, and Tom Palmer was working. I forget what he was. Maybe the Avengers he was inking. I forget what it was. That Greg Wright was the assistant editor on, and he had talked to Tom Palmer on the phone, told him how much he liked him, really liked his stuff. Tom Palmer would talk to him about inking, and they'd go over stuff, and he was giving Greg all this insight. So then, one of the first meetings, Greg was in editorial meetings. Jim Shooter was looking at some Tom Palmer inked pages and said, I think Tom Palmer's inks aren't as good as they used to be. He's kind of losing it here and here and here. And he said to Greg Wright, I want you to call up Tom Palmer and tell him all this stuff. So of course Greg, and he said, as if it was you saying it, and so of course Greg Wright's panicking. He's like, Tom Palmer's going to hate me if he does this. So finally he said something like, okay. He said something about, oh well, Tom Palmer's a master inker. How about if I talk to John Romita and ask him what I should say to Tom? And Jim Shooter was like, all right. So then he brought the pages to John Romita, and he's like, what do you need, kid? As John Romita always said. And he's like, he's like, you're bringing me some of these great Tom Palmer and, John Buscema pages to look at. And he tells him the whole story, and John Romita's like, what? What? Is he crazy? And John Romita goes through it all and tells him how great it is. And he's like, hold on, let me go talk to him. I'll see what he wants. So then John took the pages to Jim Shooter, and that was that. So, Greg didn't have to call him and say how bad his pages were. But I was like, Greg was like, whew. He's like, Tom Palmer probably would have hated me if I called him and told him all that stuff.
Wow.
But social media is filling up with Tom Palmer stories today.
But I have to think of one and share it.
So. Like I
Cause
said, I never met him, but everybody always said really nice things about him. He's one of those.
oh, nicest guy. He would talk to you. He was like, and again, classic gentleman that you walk into the room, he'll stand up and shake your hands. Um, as I mentioned before, conventions. I did more drinking at Marvel than I ever did in college, and so because there was always an event at the bar,
Right.
almost every other night, almost every night. Not even an event. It was like, oh, work's time's over. Let's go get a drink. And definitely at conventions, I remember like just came in. Everyone was hanging out, drinking and stuff like that. I went to the bathroom and I washed my hands, and there is no towels, and there is no hot air machine. They didn't have them at the time. It was all towels that back then. And so it's just like walking out. I'm walking out of the bathroom, shaking my hands, and I stop, and who's in front of me is Tom Palmer. And it's like, hey, Wilson, how you doing? He sticks his hand. I'm like, my hands are wet. He's like, I don't care about wet hands. How are you doing? We're just shaking hands and stuff like that. And just proceeded to just talk and have drinks and stuff like that. And just, classy guy. Uh, and again, it's one of those things where it's like always fun to be at. And as I mentioned, last time I saw him, he was at a con. He was there with his son, and they were just signing books. And what I have is a 1978 Marvel convention. It's not an annual, but a souvenir book from the 1978 conventions way back when. And I take this to a lot of cons, and I get older comic book artists to sign it. So I had that with me, and it's like, hi, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Wilson Ramos. And he jumped out of his seat to give me a hug. Like, of course I remember you. How have you been? And that's the way he always was. And again, happy to see everyone, especially when they worked in comics. And,
Right.
Again, being there in the trenches with us.
Right.
Kind of a thing. So it's like,
in comics, it stands out when you hear a story about how nice someone is. Most people aren't that nice.
No, not at all. It's surprising who's nice, and then sometimes it's surprising who's not so nice.
Yeah. Most people are okay, but
yeah. Because again, sometimes you can have a bad day at a con.
Yeah.
You only maybe had an interaction for 20
Right.
minutes, and the guy happened to be a jerk.
There's
and then
always
other
that.
times, there's other times where, you get a great story from them.
Yeah, I had one of those with Carlos Pacheco.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay, so Pacheco's from Spain, so it was easy to get him on a con here about 2002 or 3. They tried doing an American style con, and they spared no expense, which meant that there was no second con the following year. But they got Pacheco, and me and another guy, we were set up. We were going to do a joint. We were going to interview the guy at the same time, no problem. But then the guy goes to the bathroom, and he comes out of the bathroom, and he doesn't want to do the interview anymore, and comes up with some lame excuse. And the other guy, what the hell? Not cool. And he kept going on. The other guy kept going on and on for weeks after in our message boards. But then about a few years later, about 4 or 5 years later. So the guy who used to work for one of the comic shops that I go to, he got an invitation to go work for a comic shop in Ireland, and then they organized a con there in Dublin, and then I saw the guest list. That time I had more money, so the guest list. That was months in advance, so we could plan this out. So if I book a plane now and I book an hotel now, not very expensive. Okay, let's go. I convinced a friend of mine to go with me. There's Carlos Pacheco is there. I'm at the bar, at the hotel bar, and I invite first Dougie Braithwaite, and then Pacheco for an interview. No problem there.
I'm guessing something happened in that bathroom. He had some intestinal distress going on.
Yeah, but no problem. The thing is, I never I recorded the interviews. I never published them anywhere, and the files were lost about 3 computers ago. So I never published them anywhere.
Oh.
They were pretty good because I asked Pacheco about Iberia Inc., the Spanish superhero comic he made with his friends from Madrid. He had no plans at the time. They were still working out when was the next Aerosmith going to be published. If I don't know, that it was going to take more than 10 years for the next one to come out.
And the next
Braithwaite was a pretty nice guy, though. Very unassuming. He had just come out of doing Justice at DC with Alex Ross, and he's a very nice guy. I think being a nice guy is what's preventing him from being more famous.
The next comic I got this week is the second issue of Prometheus 1313. This weird, mysterious, done in the European graphic album format, but by 2 Americans, by a Blaze. This is the one that's Andy Diggle and Sean Martinborough, who is based on the work by Christoph Beck. Good stuff. I liked this issue, but I remember we were discussing the first issue of this, Paolo, and we were trying to figure out who it was made for. Because it's obviously because of the big border on top and bottom, and by the fact that it's by a Blaze, who publishes a lot of the European graphic album comics in the U.S. format here. It's like, who is this made for? Because they're 2 Americans, so is it going to sell in Europe? And it's strange. But what's also weird about this is it's a prequel. But I know nothing about the series. So it's like, this would probably read completely different to somebody who's familiar with the story. Like, this to me doesn't read as a prequel because I don't know what's going to happen. But
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if anybody can publish this in the original series in the U.S. because there are many graphic novels here. 22. Yeah, 22.
Wow. So that's just weird. It's like, who is this one for? Besides Sean Martinborough fans like me, and I don't think there's a ton of Sean. Actually, it's actually Sean Martinborough. I think it's not. I keep saying Burrow, but I don't think it's that. It's Brough. It's Sean Martinborough.
I always said Bro.
I always said Burrow too, but I just looked at it the way it was spelled. I'm like, oh, I'm putting an extra syllable in it. It's Martinborough.
I gotta ask him next time I see him.
Yeah, I've never met him. I've heard he's a nice guy too.
He is a very nice guy. Yeah,
but I'm a fan of his. That's what got me to buy this. So I'll buy anything he does. But a good issue. It's about aliens, or I think in the actual series itself, aliens are on Earth and like conquered Earth or something. I don't know. But in this, it's the lead up to aliens landing on Earth.
Because the funny thing is that the prequel didn't even come out in France yet.
No. It's weird. It's like, who's making this?
So I don't know.
I got an Usagi Yojimba. Always good. I love these Neko. I think the Neko ninja. They're bats with swords on their wings. Who are a ninja clan? Who are a ninja clan in here? And they're tough. So this is Usagi's always good.
What issue is that?
Guy's the master. What was that?
What issue number is that?
Issue 30.
All right, so I have 29 to catch up. Then this is issue 1 from last week.
I think this is volume 4. If issue 30, I don't think they put volume numbers in it, but I think this would be volume 4. Because it's a new company, they don't put volumes in it. Nah. Stupid comic book companies not keeping track of volumes.
How are we supposed to keep track of what we're doing?
Yeah. And I finally got those. I think someone said this came out a couple of weeks ago. The Great Gatsby #5, this adaptation that's been going on by Ted Adams and George Coelho.
Coelho.
Coelho?
Coelho.
Sharpie. Coelho. Did I get it right?
Coelho.
Coelho. Coelho.
That's going to be a little... Yeah, Coelho.
Coelho.
I can't say it either.
I got it before. Now I've lost it.
Yeah,
I completely lost it.
No, you can't hold more than one Portuguese name at a time.
No.
The fact that you already know how to pronounce Araújo is already
that made me lose Coelho. I'm putting whole syllables in there that are supposed to go together, and then I'm either putting syllables in or taking them out. I haven't got the right syllables.
You try to pronounce the L with the sides of your tongue.
L.
Okay, okay, good. Now do it with the tip and the sides at the same time. Harder.
I don't know.
Yeah. A little more work.
I'll have to practice that. But terrific art. A lot of fun. Maybe his suits aren't as good as they could be. But know what I find interesting about this is, I think, the 4th Gatsby comic book adaptation I've read. And it's always interesting to me what they leave out. Like, first, it's a short book. It's only 200 something pages, not a ton, like 4 hours to read it in the audiobook version. So it's not a long book. And there was just one scene here. Where was it? This is sort of a very important scene that he did the first part in a full page, and the second part in kind of just as a pinup. It's a scene where it's a pivotal scene where the main character Tom's mistress spots them going into town. So the scene is the whole scene is our narrator Nick noticing the mistress noticing them. And it's sort of this pivotal scene that happens, at least it's pivotal to me. And they kind of skipped over it here. And I was like, I wonder why they skipped over that part. But all the graphic novel adaptations do that. They emphasize, I guess, one part. They skip over certain parts. They just leave out this or that. It's not terribly important to the plot. But I always find it fascinating the different, being that this is the 4th one I've read this year, the different choices they make. So it's good stuff.
I wonder if you take all 4 of those stories, can you make a complete
good question
book?
Good question.
I'm curious
with every single line.
If they've taken out, so you mentioned that you read them all. So did anyone take out the same exact thing?
I don't think so. I don't think they do. I can't remember what each one is. I remember each time I've read one, I've gone, that's interesting that they gave that part short shrift, or whatever, something like that. Because like I've listened to the audiobook so many times now that I notice. I may not have noticed, earlier in the year, but now I notice when things are missing. And though it wasn't in this issue, there's still one scene in Gatsby that baffles me as to why it's there. There's one scene, I guess it's there. The only reason I can think it's there is for comic relief, but it's not really a book that needs comic relief.
Okay.
There's one scene that it's one of the first times Nick has gone to one of Gatsby's great big parties. And as he's leaving the party, he notices all the traffic in Gatsby's driveway is backed up because one car lost a wheel. and because it ran into the sidewalk or something over there, and it lost a wheel, and all the other cars are starting to honk behind it. And a guy comes out of the car drunk, and he's like, I don't know what happened. And there's this whole scene where they're talking to this guy, and he's like, I'm terrible with cars. I don't know what happened. And they're like, well, he's like, I wasn't even trying. It's like, oh, you're terrible with cars and not even trying, and that you shouldn't be. No wonder you got into an accident. He's like, you don't understand. I'm not even the driver. And then another drunk guy gets out of the car, and he's like, oh, am I gonna? And the scene goes on for a few pages in the book, and then the chapter ends, and I'm always like, what was that scene in that? Well, what in a very slim book where everything is edited down tightly, we have this one scene with a bunch of drunks getting into a little car accident on the way out of the party, and I never quite understood that one scene in all the times I've read it and listened to it. But that scene never gets shorted in any of the graphic novels or anything. Because it's like I said, it's a 3-page scene in the book, and I'm always like, why is that there? Is there something important about this scene that I'm missing?
The microcosm into the 20s. The drinking and driving is an important
It's got to
thing.
be something like that. Because
it might be a
theme
time
of bad
period
driving
thing.
in the book.
It might be just something with that time period that is.
Yeah.
It's something that is time period related.
It might be like there was a theme of bad driving in the book, and that just might be the funny bad driving, and there was a fatality bad driving near the end of the book. That's near the climax of the book. So it's like, could have something to do with it, but I always found that scene a little weird. It always kind of stands out to me. And there's also no scene like this in the whole Gatsby book, I don't think, of kids playing at a fire hydrant. I don't know why I like the cover. I don't know why they chose it to be the cover.
That's a very New York thing too. So maybe it's just a
New York thing.
Yeah.
Maybe they just wanted a New York thing going. And maybe, I wonder if, I think he may mention a fire hydrant at one point. That's right. They're in this hotel in this issue. So maybe he mentioned kids. I don't remember him mentioning kids at a fire hydrant, but maybe he
Right.
did.
The only thing I remember, you know what? The hotel was because they went because it was hot.
Yes.
And they decided to go to the hotel. So that whole thing with the kids playing in front of the fire hydrant would make sense. Because I remember from the book clearly that it was too hot. So that's
in
why
that hotel.
That's why they went to the hotel. Yeah.
That was good stuff. And the last comic I got this week, Dark Spaces Wildfire. This is the one that turns into a heist book.
Oh, okay.
With these it's the prisoners who fight fires, and their guard decide they're going to pull a heist, and it's not going to go well. We get the foreshadow, but terrific art. Who's the artist on this? Hayden Sherman, Rhonda Pattison. Terrific art, very good. And this might be the first book where I like the Scott Snyder writing. I think he's doing a nice job with this. I've read some Scott Snyder books, and they've always been okay. He's been a solid B writer for me. But I just like the writing on this. Is just there's a lot of sort of waxing poetic about the heist and what's going to go on and the trouble she's having. It's narrated by the guard. So I must say I've been really impressed with this. I think it's a 4-issue mini. But a nice one. Dark Spaces Wildfire. IDW. Oh, that's IDW's new line of creator-owned stuff.
Okay. I'm always in for a good heist story.
Listen, in the last 10 years or so, I've realized that heist stories are one of my favorite genres. Good genre. My last note I have for something I jotted down this week that I was wondering, have you ever heard of anyone investing in new comics? By that I mean, like usually when you hear about like serious people investing in comics, it's always old. If you got a lot of money and you want to park it somewhere, you buy Fantastic Four #1. I have a good Hearst story as well. William Randolph. Like if you hear about Heist, there we go. He didn't mean William Randolph. He meant Heist. Look at that. I thought he liked oh God, that famous movie, Citizen Kane. There we go. Like if someone serious is going to invest in comics, they're going to buy Amazing Fantasy 15, Fantastic Four #1, Hulk 181. That's all the blue chip stuff. All the people I see on, YouTube or whatever are flippers. You try to get the hot book this month and then sell it for. You try to buy, a $5 book and sell it for $50.
Mhm.
But I think about like in the Magic the Gathering game. There's this one guy I watch. Rudy, his name is. I forget the name of his channel. Big Magic the Gathering channel. But he invests in Magic the Gathering. He not only invests in individual cards, he invests in unopened boxes. So every time a new set comes out, he gets a certain number of unopened boxes, puts them away for 5-10 years, and they accumulate in value. His cardboard empire, as he calls it. He also buys old boxes too. You could pay a lot of money for like original Alpha Edition unopened Magic the Gathering boxes because they just don't exist. But I'm like, is there anyone who says, here's a new comic coming out that I think is going to be worth money in 10 years, and invests $1,000 in getting copies of it, and just sticks it in a closet for 10 years so he can then sell it for $10,000 or whatever he's going to sell? I'm like, is there anyone who does that? I don't think that's a kind of investing that gets done in comics.
I think that it happens, and I think the problem is that people buy the wrong things. Would you like some Deathmates? Because I have them all.
I think it happens on a small scale.
Purpose.
I don't think there's anyone dropping $1,000 on the latest, saying, "Oh, this new Moon Knight series is going to be worth a lot in 10 years."
The closest thing that I saw to anything like that was Mile High Comics. He built a section of his store.
Mm-hmm.
His name escapes me right now from Mile High.
Chuck Rosensky.
Chuck. He has shelves in his store that he's been filling up with comics and just sealing them. And he doesn't plan to touch those for like 15 to 20 years. Mm-hmm. But I don't even think he has an order of what he's putting in there.
Now, I think that has to do with, like we talked about last week, his idea to have every back issue available forever.
Right, but this was something different because he's sealing these books away.
But I think that's for his future ability to have every back issue available forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in 15 years, all these books he's got there are going to be sold out, and he needs stuff to sell then.
Right.
I think that's what he's putting away for. I don't think he expects to get $100 a book. He expects to get whatever they're worth at that time.
So other than that, I don't think anyone, as far as I'm aware of, is investing in that type of thing. Because I don't know if the people who are like getting the CGC books, you mentioned, they might all just be flippers.
Yeah. I think if you're buying CGC books, well, if they're the $10, $20, $50,000 CGC books, you're a real investor, but you're investing in that one book.
Right.
I think other people, nobody is buying 100 copies of some comic and sending them all to CGC for 10 years from now. They're buying 100 copies of a comic, sending them all to CGC so they can sell them this fall.
Right. And again, I don't know if anyone's doing that, and I'm sure someone attempted it, but probably, as I mentioned, attempted it on the wrong books. I'm sure there is somebody sitting on
Is it?
100 Deaths of Superman
Yeah,
thinking it was going to
but in
go
those
somewhere.
days it was easy. Comics were cheaper even. So what it would I, now it's even more expensive. I think in those days there well, Chuck Rosansky wrote an article once that I kind of agree with him with, where he said there was no speculator boom in the 90s. It was that the bar for getting an account, a business account at Diamond or whatever comic distributor, was so low that thousands of people tried to open comic shops and sell comics. Like at that time, there was 5,000 comic shops in the U.S., but they weren't all comic shops. So rather than like outside speculators coming in to buy, 100 copies of X Force 100, it was really guys saying, I'm going to run my own comic shop and buying copies of X Force 100 that they were going to sell then. But within a few years, all those shops were out of business. And all those comics ended up in storage lockers. The idea of somebody from outside comics saying Death of Superman, whatever issue that was, is going to make me $1 million, and coming in and buying 1,000 copies of it just never happened.
Right.
And I kind of agree with that because I've never met or heard of any interview with, any story about any actual person who, because you always hear about, oh, the speculator boom in the 90s, who were supposedly people, then the speculators moved on to baseball cards. Oh, and then the speculators moved on to Pokemon cards. And I'm like, how come I've never met any of them? How come I've never heard an interview with one of them? How come I've never heard one of them write his story? So I don't think I agree with Chuck, and I don't think the speculators actually existed. They were actual comic book people who wanted to sell comic books.
And at that time, there were a lot of places to get comic books.
Yeah,
And there was a lot of stores. And I almost want to say, didn't the Manhattan Mall have 2 comic book shops in it at one time?
I
Or
don't.
was that
Hanley's was in
no,
there
no? What
originally.
it was is that Hanley's was outside. Then there was a comic book shop in the mall, and then
Right.
on the other side there was a card shop that sold comic books. So you had 3 places to buy comic books within literally across the street from each other.
And there was
And
like in my little county here, right now there's 2 comic shops that I know of. We're the geographically smallest county in New York State. About 325,000 people now live in Rockland County. I think it might be might be up a little from it was in the 90s. But in the 90s, during the boom, there was 12 comic shops in just this county. So it was crazy how many there were at that time. And like I said, there's 2 now. And those are the ones I know of. There was probably some other little hole in the wall ones. Let me see how many I can think of off the top of my head. The 2 I go to, Wizard was still here, hole in the wall there, a shop over there. That's 6. That's 6 just that I know of off the top of my head. Another one over there, 7 down the street. So there's 7 I can think of off the top of. Oh, one in AC Moore parking lot, which is gone now. There's 8 I can think of off the top of my head 30 years later, when now there's 2. So it was like, I think he was right in that. There were no speculators who were going from cards to comics to Pokemon. There was just a bunch of people who really wanted to be a comic shop.
yeah, I never thought of it, and it's like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Because have you ever met a person who was a comic book speculator in the 90s?
No, I only met a card speculator because he was coming into the shop just to buy cards so he could flip them later. It was a bit of a dick about it. Um, and that was about it. He was the only one that was like coming in. He was buying the cards, but he was buying the comics, but he was there to just. But he was a collector. He was still buying stuff for himself too.
Right.
But he was one of those people that was really grinding and trying to make his money by buying whatever he can, figuring out where the special cards were in an unopened box. Because back then, if you knew that the fourth card down
Ah,
on the left side will always be the hologram card, no
right.
matter where it got printed. No matter because it came from the factory, it always had the same number. So if you bought the box, you could figure out where all the special cards were at the very beginning. When what was it? Fleer and Skybox, all those early year guides, they were always packaged the same way. So the third pack down on the left will always be a hologram card type of thing. So he was one that would come in and ask, "Oh, has this box been opened yet?" And we had got to the point where we, as in the comic book guys, the sellers would have to go and
Right.
mix it up so people would have a chance to
Yeah.
get it because he was one of those guys that would come in and he would hit every comic book shop just to get that special card that he
Right.
would be selling at a con at a higher price. So that
Huh.
was the closest. That one guy was the only one I ever met that I think we would point at him and call him a speculator.
Yeah, but once again, he's looking to sell it right away.
Yes.
That's
Yeah, he
different
wasn't.
when the story always was, oh, these comics will put my kids through college.
Right.
So the idea was you were putting them away and they were going to grow in price. So I watch a pop culture store owner in New York that invests in new comics, invests in lots of stuff, but regularly see him buy new stuff and put it. How much new stuff? That's just it. Does he invest? Does he buy? I know people who will buy 4 copies of a comic that they think is going to be you know expensive in years, but for spending $20 on a comic isn't an investment to me. It's like I'm talking like my comic shop owner said he thinks he knows one guy who kind of does that, but he thinks he's really laundering money from his cash only business. He's not sure what's going on with that guy. That's interesting, Wilson. I've never heard about the cards. Yeah, I remember those days where if you knew the pattern that the cards were in, you could get all the special ones.
Yeah. Or the Marvel Universe trading cards, the first series, it would be how many cards per pack, 10 cards or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was, but the hologram card would be card number 11. So instead of taking a card out, they would put a card in. So if you were to take the card packs, I just happen to have a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ones. If you had 2 of them and you put them together, and one you could feel that there was an extra card in it, then you knew you
Ah.
had the hologram card. Yeah, I kind of did the same thing too.
Why wouldn't you?
Exactly, because again, you could flip it pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's not even investing. That's just taking candy from a baby.
Basically, yep.
You're guaranteed a good return.
Kind of running out of power. Let's see if I can plug this in.
Running out of power. Boom chicka hour. Wilson's got the power.
I got the power.
Yeah, but I don't think that type of comic book investor exists. I think it's too risky.
Yeah, I would agree because there's it's such so many different factors affect why a comic book is going up and any type of value. And
Yeah.
again, there's just the easiest thing to do is flip.
Yeah.
because you kind of see what's going on. That comic book that you showed before about the airplane, I could see that easily becoming a Netflix series
Yeah.
because it has the mystery.
Right.
What brought the plane down? There was a time where a lot of shows were about mysteries in planes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the fact that we still have planes disappearing, that concept is still right to be turned into a TV show easily.
He asks his regular customers and sellers to bring in the dollar books that are a few months to years old that he thinks will be worth something in 10 to 20 years. I've seen him buy dozens of the same issue. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Because I was just thinking about that. How long do you think it would take you to want to, let's say a comic book comes out this month? How long would it take you to see that comic book rising in price and want to invest in it? Like this guy does. Like he says, months to years old. Like all of a sudden he says, I think it might take you. Like all of a sudden, what was that book? Oh, who? What was the name of the Joker's new partner?
Punch
Punchline.
out, punch out, punch.
Punchline. Do you remember when Punchline came out and everybody was chasing down Punchline's first appearance the month it came out?
Yes.
And I haven't heard Punchline mentioned in forever now. How long do you think it would take somebody to start investing in Punchline or any character? You see, let's just say you wanted to invest $1,000 in one book. How much time do you think it would take before you invested that $1,000?
I don't know, because I probably, if I had $1,000 to burn like that, I don't think I
Not to
would buy it.
burn. You're investing this.
Okay, to
This is
invest,
your specific
I
plan.
I don't see investing in a comic book. I see investing in comic book artwork.
No, forget. This is
But
what you're. It's like read, rip, and slab. This is what you're
okay,
investing.
this is all
You
I can do.
see it. You
Okay,
see it. It's
I got
you.
$1,000, and it has to be the same book, right?
Yeah, you're one book. You're thinking, and not one old expensive book. A new book
A
that
brand
you
new book.
think you're going to turn your $1,000 into $3,000 in 5 years or whatever. Think it would take you 6 months
It would probably take at least 6 months to just study
to
what's
pick
coming
a
out,
comic?
to pick a comic, what's coming out. Am I going to choose a Marvel book that might have a new character being introduced? And that would be more of the safe way to go, is
Mm-hmm.
to find out, is there a new Marvel or DC character that's coming out, hopefully trying to get the next X-23. She has a high priced book, I think, now,
Yeah.
after a while. Spider Gwen, I think, was the next
Mm-hmm.
kind of character. Um, but again, it is such it's such a it's
I
such a
think
gamble
I
because
think
again,
another one. It's not. I think another one of the problems too is selling the books
yeah,
because it's not like buying. If you've got 1,000 of the same book, that means you have to find 1,000 people to sell that book to. So
Almost.
yeah,
almost, yeah. No, and do you send some of them to be CGC'd, or do you just, because that's money that you have to invest into that too,
right.
and a brand new
Mhm.
comic book costs at least $25 to start the process. I don't know exactly how it works that way with CGC.
Yeah.
I never actually did it myself. I've always seen other people do it.
He speculates in a lot, but he likes buying good copies of youth-oriented character things and puts them away so the 30-year-olds, 15 to 25 years want a good copy of nostalgia, whatever. Yeah, I can understand that.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
I've seen him do with SpongeBob stuff. Okay. Saga number one. But I found that an interesting thought because also I don't know how most investments don't make a huge return. So if your $1,000 turns into $3,000, that's actually a home run investment because you don't get 200% increases in your investment. If
Right.
you're investing in stocks and over, you're looking for 6% a year or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's why you have to be a big player. You have $1 million. Then you want to turn those into 1.1 million if you're lucky. You're not
yeah,
going to turn them into 5 million.
right.
But 1.1 is a good return.
That's a tremendous return on $500,000 because you've doubled your money.
Easiest way to make $1 million on comics is you start with $1 billion and you start
Start with
investing
$2
in
million. That's easy.
start with 2 million and you start
You'll have it down to
creating
$1 million in no time.
in no time. But yeah, I mean
Well,
it could be like anything that's collectible that if you buy it and you wait long enough, or you start buying those books and you start destroying a bunch and you make them even harder to find because what costs more, the first appearance of Batman,
there's,
5 issues exist, I believe.
there's only one copy of Street Poet Ray left. Who wants it?
There you go. And then that's the thing. um you know if you can buy somebody's low stock and then destroy half of them, the other half just went up in
That's right.
value.
Also, my thought before, well, Chuck Rosansky's thought about how there weren't really speculators. There were people who wanted to be comic dealers buying a lot of those comics. What happened to all those comics? What happened to all those New Mutant 87 or 98s and stuff like that? A lot of them might just be gone because a lot of those guys got out of business and who knows what they did with their comic. They could have thrown them away. They could have been in some storage locker that got cleaned out. They could be in some storage locker waiting. Now, a lot of regular comic shops have them in their storage locker too. Some of the million sellers. But I think I think there's fewer copies of certain 90s comics than we think.
Probably.
Mm-hmm. I think his store in Manhattan, little comic record toy Funko Pop store he runs with his wife. Pop Comic may be the name, I think. Seems like a very nice guy. Been doing it since the 90s. Wow. Well, he knows what he's doing, I bet. He knows exactly how much time before he jumps on a comic.
Yeah,
well,
nostalgia is one of those big things. So you could almost take anything, wait a little while, and resell it later.
Pop culture collectibles. Well, we should let Paolo get to bed and say goodnight. Think I talked about all my notes. Yep. I did. We'll see. What if anything pops into my head this coming week for next week. My little notebook. Sometimes I have these comic book thoughts. I'm like, I got to talk to the guys about these.
Good idea. That's why randomly I toss stuff on Facebook. It's like, what would happen if this and that happened? Just to get a comic book conversation going.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
so
in the on the Discord servers I'm at, I'm trying to convince people that Watchmen is not a superhero deconstruction.
Okay.
It's too positive for that.
I think when we were discussing that, we somehow came to the point which I liked that Watchmen is kind of like a superhero deconstruction satire, except it's the only one that takes it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's no different than other like Normal Man and other times where people take a look at superheroes and turn it on their ear, except Alan Moore took it really seriously. He's not laughing at superheroes. Well, everybody else kind of jokes at superheroes when they
martial law.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave you on that thought. And everybody have a good week out there. We'll
Take
catch
care,
you
everybody.
later.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being here.